Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the 2014 IP Champions Conference. My name is Brian Noyes, and I'm with the U.S. Chamber's Global Intellectual Property Center, and we thank you all for being here. I will take note, if you would all, at the side we have these panels. If you are active in Twitter and can engage with social media, we're using the hashtag IP Champions today. So please feel free to let everybody know about your experience here and engaging on Twitter. Now it's my pleasure to introduce David Hirschman, President and CEO of the Global Intellectual Property Center, for our opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for tremendous work you and the entire team have done for this, our second annual IP Champions event. I think you can start calling it annual after you've done it at least twice. So and we're hoping that over time this becomes even bigger and better, and certainly was a great success last year. And I know we're worried about space issues at lunch today, so it's a tribute to the efforts that you and the team have made. But why IP Champions? Why even do an event like this? Well, simply put, it's to celebrate those who make our lives better every day by creating, distributing, and protecting intellectual property-driven innovation. Now, as you know, we believe that IP delivers just as much in this century as it did 200 years ago, in many ways for our economy, for mankind, and for society. First of all, it allows companies and others to invest in innovation and to distribute innovative products and creative services that generate jobs. It makes consumers' lives by having safe, ubiquitous access to the products and services they need. And it makes sure that those life-saving and improving products are available around the globe. We think that is worth celebrating, and that is worth recognizing. Even more critical in this century than before, as I said, as important for developing economies as for developed economies, and certainly as important in the online economy as it is in the bricks and mortar economy. So what does it take to advance 21st century driven IP in our economy today? Well, obviously it takes innovators and creators with the capital and appetite to take risk to create the next new thing. It takes companies that embrace reaching today's consumers in the many ways they can and want to be reached. It takes companies that invest in protecting their consumers by taking all reasonable steps to deal with counterfeiting and piracy. It takes partners in law enforcement who can supplement what companies can do to help go after the truly bad actors. And most importantly, it takes empowered, informed consumers. Today's IP Champions event is about recognizing and celebrating the best examples in each of these areas, the best consumer education campaigns, the great work that companies are doing to reach consumers with innovative and creative products and services, the best examples of true partnerships between law enforcement and the private sector to protect consumers and IP. We are glad that you're here today to celebrate these accomplishments with us. We will start this morning where it all begins, by showcasing innovation. Then we will have a discussion and awards presentation on showcasing some of the best and most creative consumer empowerment and education campaigns. And we'll be followed by looking at what is working and what can be done to further strengthen the efforts to protect consumers through effective enforcement. I think it's a full day, and it'll help us showcase what I view as the three pillars of success: business doing what it needs to do, effective partnerships with law enforcement and with government, and most importantly, consumers who are informed, empowered, and able to make the choices that they want to make. That is what we are trying to celebrate today. I think you'll be inspired by some of the specific stories and examples you'll hear, and certainly it will showcase the many ways that IP is as relevant today as it ever was. And with that, let me turn it over to Brian Noyes, who is in fact the MC today and who is the architect of this entire event, to lead us right into the first discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I wish I was talented enough to be an architect. With that, I would like to call our first panel to the stage. We're very grateful to have Mark Crowell with the University of Virginia, who is the Executive Director of the UVA Innovation and Program and Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Virginia. Mr. Crowell's 25-year career in university innovation includes extensive experience in technology licensing, startup company formation, seed capital development, innovation-based economic development initiatives, and planning and research campus planning. And with that impressive list of things, we will turn it over to Mark Crowell to introduce his panelists and start the conversation. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to start out by making sure that I don't have 100 new friends who don't pronounce my name quite correctly. So my name is Mark Crowell. Minor difference, but one that my father felt strongly about. So in his honor, I feel I need to maintain some consistency. I am delighted to be here. I'm particularly delighted to be with two distinguished, creative, brilliant inventor, entrepreneur colleagues who are doing the sort of work that keeps people like me very busy, people who work in university innovation advancement enterprises. So I want to make sure that I'm very focused on maintaining as much time as possible for my two colleagues here to talk about the marvelous work they're doing to not just create invention, but to actually move that invention toward innovation by using intellectual property strategies, business development strategies, proof of concept work, and other approaches to create value for our economy and to advance the very important work they've done to benefit society and to create economic value. Before I start, though, I want to also thank Brian and all of his colleagues here at the U.S. Chamber and the Global IP Center. I have done some work in global IP policy development that the Chamber has been involved with on the periphery or directly, and I'm very aware of the terrific impact this work is having on creating a level IP playing field, literally worldwide, to help ensure that other countries are essentially playing by the same rules, and other universities, inventors, companies, and others who are creating new innovations that drive our economy have the best chance possible to make it to the marketplace. I'm from the University of Virginia, and so we have two rules when we speak in public if you're from UVA, and Reza, I hope you're listening. One is we have to wear an orange tie. I hate to report back in Charlottesville that Reza didn't exactly fulfill his duty there. But secondly, we always have to have a pithy Thomas Jefferson quote. The good news is that for what we're here to talk about and to celebrate today, Jefferson had lots to say. He not only founded the Patent Office, he was an inventor himself and a very creative individual. And one of the things he said that I think really drives a lot of what you're going to hear me talking about is fundamental to this issue and the way universities are approaching innovation and commercialization. Jefferson said, wherever, very simple but very profound, wherever an invention proves to be useful, it ought to be tried. And I think boiled down to its basic components, that's a pretty good principle, I think, both for this panel and perhaps for the whole day. But beyond UVA and Thomas Jefferson, why is this such an important topic? As an economic development guy, let me just share a couple of observations very quickly before I dive in to a deeper discussion of what we're doing at UVA as a, hopefully, best practice model for you to think about with respect to the university's role in advancing innovation. Think about just a couple of very basic facts here. 3/4 of the new jobs in our economy are found in entrepreneurial companies, many of which are fueled by innovations that come out of our universities. So I would argue that this is part of our return on investment proposition, our value proposition for a university to articulate to the Congress, to our state government officials, to our donors, and other stakeholders as to why it's important to continue to invest in the research enterprise. Secondly, think about this. 1/2 of the economic growth in our economy occurs in industries that barely existed, if at all, only a decade ago. I think that's just, again, a fundamental underscoring of the importance of innovation in driving economic development. What is true from my perspective is that we know every region of the world has an innovation-based economic development agenda. I never have understood this quite so profoundly as when I traveled to Singapore in 2005 for my first trip ever to that very interesting and stimulating environment, and attended a talk by the Prime Minister of Singapore where he announced a new campaign in the nation's public schools where school children were wearing buttons that said HIP. And I thought, well, HIP, are you hip? What's that all about? It was an acronym. It stood for Honor Intellectual Property. So that's a fundamental principle that is being taught in the public schools, in this particular case in Singapore, but again, a principle that's driving a lot of what's happening literally the world over. So I'm going to spend a few minutes giving you a bit more in-depth example of what we're doing at UVA to drive our innovation toward commercialization and market uses and outcomes to create value around those assets. Then I'm going to introduce my two colleagues and let them have the remainder of our time to talk about their important work, and also to, with any time left, engage in a bit of a back and forth Q&A between the three of us, and if anyone in the audience wishes to participate in that Q&A, we'll welcome you to do so. I guess it would help if I pointed this in the right direction. Okay. Great. Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't advance more than once. Sorry about that. So what is it that university innovation enterprises are really charged with doing? Obviously, IP is a key cornerstone of that. But what you see here is a bulleted list of really key functions that focus on a number of different strategies that we have to be prepared to undertake to create value and to accelerate important innovation toward real commercial markets, toward real customers, and toward real value creation. So clearly, we're in the IP business in a major way. We obviously are happy when our IP generates revenue to the university, and we do have policies by which we share that revenue with the inventor and with others at the university to ensure that the incentives are properly aligned and that any upside benefit accrues to the improvement of the research environment and the personal economic stakes of the inventor. Increasingly, we also have an economic development mandate, and so we're very interested in creating startup companies to help drive technologies through to the marketplace. But we also realize that many of our technologies are perhaps best commercialized not through a high-risk, high-stakes, high-dollar startup, but rather through partnering with an existing company. And so all universities, UVA included, are in the business of trying to partner early-stage inventions with industry users who might fund research and who then might license that IP to actually develop a product. More and more, what we do is being done as part of our strategy to recruit and retain the best talent. You're going to hear from one of our very talented research scientists in a few minutes, a young, up-and-coming superstar scientist entrepreneur that frankly could go do what he's doing anywhere. But I think by having solid business development and innovation management procedures and capacities in place, we stand a better chance to keep that kind of talent in Charlottesville and at the University of Virginia. Increasingly, by the way, success in this business actually affects the way rankings are looking at universities. All of our university presidents will tell you that rankings don't matter. Let me tell you that the rankings do matter, that they're looked at when they come out, and everyone discusses quite often how we can improve our rankings, and particularly the ones that are deemed to be more important. I've been doing this for a long time. I have two young colleagues here, obviously of a slightly different generation. I've been in this business in universities for about 25 years. So let me talk about the way we were, and then I'm going to talk about how we've changed to really ramp up, if you will, the way in which we're creating value around our innovation assets. The innovation advancement or technology transfer model that existed really for most of the last 20 years or so the 20 years or so after Bayh-Dole was passed, the basic law that enables universities to own IP. I would define technology transfer as a very linear, somewhat reactive or almost passive process. The inventors would tell us they had an invention, we would probably file a patent if it looked interesting, and then we would maybe market to industry, but basically what we were doing was waiting for industry to raise their hand and say, I'd like to license that. We'd negotiate a license, and then the industry would take it inside, and we'd probably never see it again, and if we were lucky, maybe a royalty check would arrive. Also, we call this a technology push model, but even that, I think, is giving the universities too much credit for what we were doing to try to connect these assets with outside users. UVA was no different, and what I'm showing you here, Reza might understand it. When I first saw this diagram, I thought this was some sort of circuitry that came out of our Department of Electrical Engineering. This was actually a process diagram whereby we tried to show the way that we pushed IP through our system and out to the market. Not surprisingly, our faculty inventors were not terribly excited when hit with this kind of a diagram. By the way, this was actually on the cover of a best practice manual that our office published in the 1990s on how to do technology transfer. If you fast forward to today and the way UVA and many other universities are reinventing innovation, I would really, and how we manage it, I would really characterize it as an effort to, quote, enhance our partnering IQ. UVA's first step to do this was to create a pan-university innovation management role, which Chief Innovation Officer, which is my role. One of the first universities to do this, to serve as a front door to the university for companies, for investors, for inventors, faculty, grad students, others, entrepreneurs who are interested in the innovation enterprise and how to partner to find innovation assets worthwhile in terms of their market potential. Yes, what we do still requires a very strong focus on IP. IP is one of the critical, if not the most critical tools in many cases toward ensuring that we actually can make it to the market. But we're also very focused on adding value and de-risking these assets through the application of a number of proof of concept approaches, internal funding designed to begin to de-risk the technologies, to build a prototype, to do one more round of experiments, to move from lab to animals or animals to the clinic in the case of biotech. What can we do to really bring more of a business development, customer and market-oriented focus to our early stage research and innovation assets, to position those assets more appropriately and in a more promising way to pursue investment and development strategies in business. A lot of what we're talking about, frankly, is fundamentally changing the culture of the university, adopting a culture of innovation, helping our faculty and research teams understand that basic research and publishing in a journal is still highly valued and extremely important, but all the journal articles in the world won't do any good if we don't push it further to get it connected in the market through the types of approaches that I'm talking about. We've changed our policies, we've shared more generously with inventors, we've actually incorporated in our promotion and tenure policies in the School of Medicine. Get this, this is, by the way, considered the Holy Grail. Someone said, you know, it was like seeing white smoke come out of the Vatican when the School of Medicine decided to incorporate criteria in the tenure policy to give credit to faculty who achieve impact in innovation. A new day in the academy when that sort of thing is happening. We celebrate and encourage entrepreneurship and industry partnerships through consulting or sponsored research. And we have a very aggressive awards program, just as the Chamber does, to celebrate IP and to celebrate innovation, to recognize accomplishment. Part of what is also involved, by the way, in terms of culture change, is opening up the academy more aggressively and in ways that I never dreamed possible, to interact with customers and industry colleagues and outside investors to understand what they need, so that we're not just saying, this is great science, why won't you pay for it? But rather, how can we work together to identify how to get that science through that translational or valley of death gap and get it more ready for the market. So I showed you the linear model, or I showed you the electric circuit model of technology transfer. This is the new model, and what you see here are a number of functional units, IP or functional processes, corporate relations, entrepreneurial business development, economic development, many different areas of focus that require resources and tools and expertise and partnerships both within our operation but also across the campus, across the community, and across the state. And the tools, the words you see in orange represent strategies ranging from venture mentoring to crowdfunding approaches to working with venture philanthropy organizations to working with entrepreneurs and residents. These are all tools that we're using to tie all of these functions together to do a better job of advancing our market, our innovations toward the market. In the interest of time, I'm going to just show you an impact, two slides that really show how all of these words actually translate into impact. A very simple but profound slide here. We actually made a Google map where we have a stick pin in the location of every startup company around Charlottesville. Charlottesville is not a big city, 50 or so thousand people, but you see here about 65 or so thumbtack pins, stick pins, that represent the location of a UVA-affiliated startup company. If you go to our website and put your cursor on any of those stick pins, it will actually tell you the name of the company and a little bit about the marketplace and the innovation that it's driving. So this is a very strong visual representation, if you will, of the kind of value that's being created. Secondly, everyone always says, well, what's the impact of all of this? How much money did you make? Well, knowing that the lag time from lab to market, particularly in biotech, can be 10 years. In other fields, it's 2, 3, 5, 7 years sometimes. That's the wrong question. In our view, the right question, if we're successful, is not how much money we're making today, but how many partnerships are we creating, how many jobs are being created, how much funding is coming into the university in various types, all around this innovation enterprise. So we actually wrote these 60 companies and we said, tell us what kind of impact, what kind of growth you're having. And these are the results. This was unbelievably powerful. Our university's president put out a press release right away. So 40 companies responded. You see a fair number of jobs, half of which are in Charlottesville. You see those companies have attracted almost $330 or $40 million in outside funding. Those companies are renting space, creating value, paying real estate taxes, really driving a lot of economic development in Charlottesville that economic developers understand. We wanted to know what sort of progress they were making advancing products toward the market and how many of these companies were funding research back at UVA. So I think what this survey did was it underscored a very profound sense of value creation and innovation advancement even before we have the potential home run, the Gatorade, the Cohen Boyer, the vitamin D, the warfarin, the well-known success stories that some universities have enjoyed. We have had 1 or 2 blockbusters at UVA. We're always hopeful that we'll have another. We just signed our first ever $1 million upfront deal just about a week ago. So there is a lot of money to be made, but there's a lot of value being created well beyond the revenue stream that's coming in currently, and that's really the primary point I wanted to talk about. So with that, I'm going to move quickly to my colleagues and ask them to tell their stories of their innovation, their research work, the IP strategies surrounding that, and then get into the Q&A portion of our program. If you'll permit me, gentlemen and audience, I'm going to introduce both of them at the same time and ask Reza to start and then have Jalali follow him directly once Reza has finished his remarks. I think you've probably seen their bios, so I won't do the traditional 5 to 7 minute introductions. I'll just tell you that Reza Manazami is a research scientist and entrepreneur and inventor and a very important member of the UVA innovation story. Reza, after finishing his undergraduate degree in chemical engineering, co-founded a company called Delta, an engineering consulting firm where he worked for 5 years for clients mostly in the energy industry. Since finishing his PhD, however, he's stayed at UVA to develop and test a working prototype that you'll hear about today of a heat transfer based on ideas incorporated in his dissertation. This very versatile technology, we believe, is a game changer. It's the pure definition of a disruptive technology that has the chance to completely change the industry in which it applies. And I'm going to ask Reza to talk to you a bit about that and its applications in the electronics, energy conservation, and aerospace industry. Following Reza's presentation, Jalali Hartman will speak. Jalali is a serial entrepreneur and inventor whose startups have enabled more than $1 billion in revenue. So again, innovation, IP, impact. His companies have attracted more than $18 million in capital from US and Japanese investors. He has co-founded or been the founding outside executive of 4 successful technology companies, including Infopia, Meeklabs, Yovia, and the company he'll talk mostly about today, Roboto. In the aggregate, his companies have employed more than 500 people. Again, impact, economic impact. He has served as a mentor to the University of Florida's Innovation Hub. University of Florida is a place that I admire a lot, and I would hope my friend at Florida, David Day, would say UVA is top 5 in this. I will say publicly that I think Florida is absolutely top 5 in innovation and how it's managing that enterprise. And he's been a very integral part of the startup ecosystems in places like Utah, Florida, and Colorado. So, Reza, thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And actually, just to start, I'm a senior scientist working in Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at UVA. And I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about the research that I'm currently working in UVA, and hopefully we are about to actually commercialize the output of this research very soon, thanks to the leadership of Mark and the support that we get from UVA Innovation. So just to give you a brief introduction what I'm working on, I just start this presentation by asking this question that what these 3 things that you're going to see have in common, that is this solar compact concentrated energy production unit and your cell phone and this hypersonic airplane. So, and the answer is not this basketball player, but and this is exactly what I'm working on for the past 7 years. So heat is a big problem in a lot of industries, and we actually started for a totally different application that was the jet engine for Boeing commercial airplanes. That was how the project started when I started my grad school here in Virginia, and then it took a totally different path that I'm going actually to talk about in the next few slides. So what I'm working right now is coming up with innovative and disruptive technologies to actually make a significant improvement on the state-of-the-art on thermal management systems that currently exist. And the problem comes from the rate of growth in electronic industry, and particularly microprocessing manufacturing companies, including Intel, IBM, NVIDIA. And the problem that they're facing is the heat that is generated in their CPUs. And as you can see, the problem is not the amount of heat that is generated in their devices, is the size that heat is generated inside. And that makes it a huge challenge actually to get rid of that heat. So that's actually what the problem is. The problem is not the amount of heat, is the size of the device that the heat is generated inside. So that makes it a big challenge, and that has been the problem for, I can say, 7 years, the past 7 years, for big players in the electronic industry to actually advance the technology to come up with faster processors. And the problem is going to even get worse with the new ideas in Intel and IBM, that they're actually trying to integrate the entire processing unit into one single chip. So they want to actually integrate the processing unit and the memory units and everything into one single chip, and that makes this a huge challenge. And this is actually the bottleneck of the electronic industry for the current time. So this is actually this plot. It actually is showing what the problem is in one single plot. You can see that they actually hit a thermal wall at the present time, as you can see there. So they can make faster CPUs, but they cannot take the heat out. So they're stuck with the current like technology, and they cannot actually offer a faster processing power to consumer. So what we actually offering in this market was actually, we thought about the large impact of this thermal management problem for like the society and the nation and the world. And that is like when you check your email on your phone, or when you check your bank account or your Facebook or any online interaction, there are these facilities called data centers all over the country and all over the world that actually are processing your interaction with the servers. And these facilities, they actually consume a large amount of heat. This is the clean side of the data center facility, but this is only the tip of the ice. The dirty part of this industry is this part. So Google, Facebook, all these like big Yahoo, Amazon, when you actually place an order online, this is actually the amount of heat that you're generating, and they need to actually get rid of this heat. And actually this shows the amount of heat, the amount of the energy that actually is consumed by cooling. As you can see, over 36% of the entire energy that is taken by a data center is actually consumed for cooling purposes. And we're talking about large amounts of energy. They're actually in the scale of the output of one giant power plant. So we're talking about big numbers. 8% of the total electricity production in US is going to these data centers, and nobody is talking about. So it's actually a very critical problem, both like economically and also on the environmental viewpoint. So our solution, everybody knows about the potential of the phase change when the liquid actually turns into vapor, and the amount of heat that is actually can be dissipated using the evaporation process. So this was not what we invented, but we just realized that there are significant problems that needs to be addressed to actually harvest the potential of this phenomena, this physical phenomena. So, and that's actually how my research on this problem has started like 5 years ago. So this is actually, as you can see, this is like a schematic of the device as exists for like multiple applications. And then we took this device and we just realized that the amount of evaporation that we need to initiate to actually get rid of heat is very tiny, and we just realized that even with all the existing technologies, they are not able to actually initiate this tiny amount of evaporation that we need to actually to get rid of giant amount of heat. So you only need to evaporate 45 milligrams of liquid water, and then you can dissipate 100 watt. But turning liquid into vapor is actually very challenging and very hard, and that's actually what everyone is actually trying to come up with a solution for. So this is actually what was the problem when I actually started my PhD work. As you can see, everybody was talking about micro channel MEMS, and everybody knew that at the time that if you put the liquid inside these tiny structures, I'm talking about structures narrower than your hair, and if you actually push the liquid into these tiny structures, you can actually achieve very impressive performance for thermal management and cooling. But there were some serious problems with this, so a lot of researchers actually gave up on the application of this microtechnology for cooling purposes. And then Jose, my advisor in UVA, and we actually looked at this problem from the scratch again. We said, okay, forget about whatever exists, and let's look at this thing from the base again. And we just realized by doing the math, it was a very complex mathematical and physical problem. We just realized that there's a huge potential that is missing in this problem, and nobody noticed that. And if we actually can achieve that like performance, we can actually bring the microfluidic cooling technology back into the market. And that's actually, by realizing that potential, we went to the next stage. That was how we actually, once we have this potential working for us, how can actually we can implement that in a device. And for that, we needed actually to overcome a couple of operational limits. And this actually, like picture is actually showing you how we actually changed the whole setup as it was at the time that we started our research, and said, okay, we flip the evaporator on its head, and who says this is the right design? This is the right design. And by just doing this simple geometrical change, we actually increase the performance 10 times. And that was actually the point that we just realized that we should definitely patent this technology. Although we didn't have any working prototype at the time. It was all ideas. It was all mathematics, physics, and not even one physical device at the time. So I think that was like that was actually my first exposure to the concept of patent, because I just thought, okay, awesome, if we actually publish this, because as researchers, the first thing that comes to our mind is that let's publish it, let's go to the first conference and tell everyone that, okay, we have this technology, we can actually improve 10 times the performance of cooling devices. And then my advisor told me, maybe this idea is worth more than just a publication and recognition of like a award in a ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineer, like conference. So we just like, and you can imagine as a PhD student, it's very important for me to have publication on my resume once I go out and start looking for jobs. And it was very hard for me to accept at the beginning that, okay, we're not going to talk to anyone and we're going just to go with the provisional patent and talk to people in UVA Innovation Program. So that was my first exposure to the commercial side of the research in UVA. And I got excited over time as I went through the different stages of like getting to know what is the patent and what could be the commercial impact of this innovation. So that was like the first patent in July 2012. And immediately after that, we just switched the research path from like pure science and mathematics and physics to just making things that work, and we can show people how it works. So in this picture, actually, you can see a microchannel evaporator. The whole size of the device is 1/2 inch. So the whole device can be like fit in like probably something a little bit larger than this pencil tip, like the whole device. And as you can see, heat is coming from the top and is initiating this intense evaporation into the liquid, and you can see the bubbles. By this like evaporation, actually, you can take giant amount of heat from the heat source and let the temperature to stay very low, very cold. So you can touch this without like having your hand burn. Otherwise, this thing can get red hot. So, and the next stage, once you have the first working prototype, we actually move to file the second patent, because now we have a physical device working, and the first actually US patent application in like very recently, 2-3 months ago. And then with that momentum, actually the support from US Department of Commerce I-6 Innovation Program, we actually moved very quickly to come up with this. Actually, that was our ultimate goal. That was a closed system. The last picture that you saw, it was just the evaporator that takes the heat out. We need to actually reject that heat in a different system to the environment. And here, as you can see, this device, it has the evaporator on the left, the CPU has a heat source on the top, and on the right, you can see how actually the vapor is turning back into the liquid and releasing the heat that it was absorbing a few minutes ago in the evaporator. And you can see the actual device in the bottom of the slide. And this is actually the device working. So on the left, you can see the intense boiling happening that is actually dissipating large amounts of heat. And the same heat is actually turning back on the right by having the vapor becoming liquid, and the droplets that you can see is falling down. And just to summarize, the path that we moved from a pure scientific idea that I could never think about, like this, like potential large applications, to something that is a totally different path for me and for the entire research. Like to look at it not as a scientific, pure scientific story, but a combination of science and the impact of science application in the real commerce world. So here, actually, I just wanted to summarize where the current technologies are is actually 20 times less than what the market demand is. So Intel, IBM, they can make processors fast enough, 10 times faster than what you have in your mobile phone or in your laptops. And they cannot actually offer you to the customer just because they melt, because they are processing so much information, they're working so fast, the amount of heat cannot be dissipated. So they're actually waiting for this technology. And I'm very optimistic and very excited that in the next few months, with the help from Mark and the UVA Innovation, we can go and talk to the major players, and we have already had interest from 2 big venture capital firms in California and DC to invest to help us to transition from this stage to the actual final product. And with that, I close my comments about my research and my work in UVA.
Thank you very much, Jalali. Jalali?
Thank you. Wow, that is actually a tremendous breakthrough, and I'm not sure that everybody fully understands the technical side of it, but a huge increase in computing power and decreasing cost. So that's great. So what I want to talk about today, I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm working on in my background, and one of the issues that people like myself and Reza face is when we innovate and we come up with an invention or we have something, it actually creates kind of a bigger issue. And the issue is, what do we do with that? And how do we take that idea and actually get it into the hands of the consumer? And one of the things I've learned over the years is that by default, when you're creating an invention like this, a big portion of the market doesn't even know that they need it yet. And so what happens is you end up doing a lot of work to not only on the technology, but also educating the consumers, educating the markets, rolling the thing out, getting funding for it, all these different things. And so I show kind of a standard technology adoption curve, which I've used for years, just looking for what is the next thing. And just as a way to illustrate that it's like pushing a boulder uphill. Once you have that idea, there's so many things that have to fall into place to actually make it a reality, which I think you guys are finding. So huge, tremendous breakthrough will change the world. To a degree, your job's just getting started. And that's kind of what we face as entrepreneurs. So over the years, I've had a good fortune of honestly working with a lot of really talented people. I haven't done a lot of this on my own. But I started early on in artificial intelligence, and that was in the late 90s. When there was a huge tech boom going on. And literally, I was able to get funding with a patent. With some documents. I had no prototype, I had nothing. I was able to get enough funding to get the product off the ground. And over the years, kind of what's happened is we found that when we create some new technology and we create an innovation, we almost start a dual track where we have to not only work on the innovation, but also start to think, how are we going to build a market around it? How are we going to launch this? And so my evolution has kind of gone from, I have the IP, that's all I need. It's very hard to replicate. My first business, literally everything down to the database and everything was custom. Now, it's very easy for people to say, okay, that's an interesting idea, let me come up with my own prototype, and then it becomes kind of a fight. So I think the point is, it's evolved. And as an entrepreneur, I've tried to evolve with it. And I've tried to look at my IP strategy as kind of a holistic approach, and use portions of my IP, things that maybe I can sacrifice to a degree to get the market kind of moving, almost create the industry and get people aware of what's going on. And so that creates a lot of challenges. But I'm an engineer turned entrepreneur, so engineers are a little bit strange. They're not necessarily natural entrepreneurs. And what I had to do is I had to create a system that I understood and all of the engineering people that I work with understood. And so we created a system, much like Mark has done at UVA, where we can very easily start to kind of test and validate our idea. So get a concept not only filed for protection in the different areas, but see, is there a market, and do people understand, and will they buy it, and how will we get funding? And put in place a series of checks so that if the market's not ready, I can take a step back and maybe rework it, and I don't spend a lot of time and money trying to create a market. Maybe it's actually advantageous to let a competitor come into the market and do some of that work, especially if it's a bigger company. Start to create the industry for me. So I think Mark mentioned this, and this is a large number. The technologies that I've created have enabled more than $1 billion in this country already. And absolutely, you cannot do that without lots of funding and lots of good people. It's not something you're just going to do in your garage. Even a novel technology like this is going to require a lot of work. So kind of fast forward along these years, I've been working on all these different technologies involving software and hardware. And about a year and a half ago, started getting involved in robotics. And it was an interesting thing. There was a large insurance company in Florida called Florida Blue who knew that they needed to start to be more innovative than they could be internally. And they started turning to entrepreneurs and startups and saying, how can we solve this problem? And we started looking at the use of robotics with people with special needs. And there's lots of research going on. This is my friend Larry. Larry actually has Down syndrome, but this is a little robotic seal that became Larry's companion and friend, but it also is helping him to learn things like social skills and how to care for someone. And the reason I show this is because this robotic seal is really not much different than a computer or your phone or anything like that from a technology perspective, but there's something inherent about a robot that we view differently. We almost form this bond. We see it differently than a computer, and that from a software perspective is very important to us because it changes the way you view it. And we're able to deliver things in different ways that we couldn't before with just a laptop or an iPad because you have this connection to it. So as we were working with people like Larry, we came across this kind of anomaly, and that was with the condition of autism. And autism is a very challenging condition in that a lot of people have it. In fact, they just released new numbers, 1 in 68. It's probably much higher than that. A lot of people are in different levels of the spectrum. But the issue is that it's very different for everybody. It's a different experience. It's almost like the person is living in their own world, and they're having a hard time just simply interfacing with the world around them. And so we said, well, robots seem to work. There are a number of robots on the market. They're very expensive. There's a lot of work being done at universities and research institutes, but they're just not available yet. And so we said, well, this is an opportunity. $126 billion spent each year caring for people with autism, teaching them, a lot of it one-on-one. What if we had a robot that could help them and was affordable? And so we started digging into this problem. We said, this is a huge opportunity. How do we solve this? And we found that pretty much it's going to be impossible. Everybody is different. Nobody understands what's causing it. There is no cure. We started to get overwhelmed and say, this is just something that is not solvable. And so we said, well, at the very least, let's let some of these people help us design this robot. And we turned to the parents and the caregivers, people teaching at schools. And we turned to people with autism. And we said, if you could have any robot, what would it do and what would it look like? And we started to see this amazing stuff in that a lot of the responses started to be the same. They wanted to be, have a human attributes, but not too human. There's something disarming about a robot from that group. They want, in our group that we're starting with, they want it to be like a car. A lot of people want it to be like an animal. And so we said, okay, we're starting to get some consensus here. 400 or 500 parents, people giving us sketches, started to get an idea of what this is going to look like. We took those initial sketches and we turned them into, we went to our designers and we said, well, what can we do here with what we have to work with? They evolved it until finally we got this little device called One. Now, One is probably in the end not going to look like this or even do exactly what it does now, but it's a start. And it's been designed by the people. So to a degree, we have a pretty good understanding of that they're going to like it and that they're going to interact with it. And we're already seeing a lot of good results. But what I wanted to show you is, so over the course of this project, we spent thousands and thousands of dollars developing a prototype. We have some novel technology that runs it, and, hundreds of lines of code that's powering this thing. All of that is very proprietary and very valuable. But what we found was that to actually solve this problem, we're going to actually need to take some of this technology and give it to some other people to work on. Because we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough engineers, so let's create a platform that other people can use and experiment with and start to contribute to. Well, the problem with that is obviously once you do that, your IP is out there. And if I take this kit and I give it to a developer and I give them the source code, where's my value? So you can kind of see the tension. I need to be able to create that market and I need to get the help, but I also need to protect my stuff because that's how I make money. And so what we do is we came to a compromise where we'll give components of it away for free, almost like an open source model for people to work on and to give us feedback, but we want to own the core algorithms. And that algorithm in our case is we want to understand why you like a robot or don't like a robot. And so if you can kind of imagine, we've created a test system where we can put a device in a room and start to see how you interact. And yes, I'm giving away a lot of IP, and I have to make it work. But at the core of it, I have a very valuable technology that at the end of the day, I'll have, our company will own, we'll use to generate revenue. And that is understanding that connection between a human and a robot. And it has applications with this device, it has applications with other devices in the future. So that's kind of our strategy. You can see how it's evolved. In the early days, we would have taken this, built this technology, protected it, kept it very close. Now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I'm going to open up parts of it as a way to drive the market. I'm going to keep my trade secrets. Literally, I don't even talk to investors when I'm pitching VCs. We don't even tell them exactly how this thing works or what the algorithm. We just show that it does work, and that's the difference. So a little bit of background. I think we're going to open it up to discussion.
Do we have time for a few minutes? We've run a little bit over. I think we had so much to say. We promised we wouldn't do this, but I think we hopefully showed you that there's a lot of exciting work going on in these two specific cases, and more broadly at a university like the University of Virginia. If we have time for any questions from the audience, we also said it was fair game for the two inventors to ask each other questions, but I'd rather hear from the audience if there are any burning questions you have for these guys. I see a hand. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, yeah, I can't hear. Thank you.
I'm Ravi Gupta from the World Bank, and prior to the World Bank, I used to work in a tech transfer office myself. And my question is for you, Mark. A lot of TTOs are under pressure to generate revenue because most TTOs do not generate enough revenue to even cover their own costs. Of course, their overall impact is extremely high. So a lot of TTOs under pressure have started licensing out their technologies to non-practicing entities, which is debatable, but pejoratively are referred to as patent trolls. So I was wondering, what are your views on universities licensing out their IP to such non-practicing entities? And secondly, do you believe the America Invents Act, how does it address that particular problem?
Yeah, great questions. I'll try to be very quick with the answer. And by the way, I've done a lot of work also with the World Bank and doing some IP capacity building in Eastern Europe primarily. I don't see a lot of evidence that universities are guilty of what I consider to be the worst aspects of trolling. I think it does happen, but I think most universities are very cognizant of their public policy responsibilities, their societal obligations, and frankly, the requirements of the Bayh-Dole Act that say that not only if we elect to own IP, do we have to try to commercialize it, but it says we have to do that by partnering with an entity that is capable of exercising due diligence to advance it to the market quickly. So I think most of us take very seriously that part of our obligation and would hopefully act this way anyway. Not to put our technology in the hands of an entity that's simply going to consolidate rights and then go out and sue people. We have been very vocal in the university community writ large, certainly the University of Virginia, and working in Washington, but also in our state capital. If you don't know it, all 50 states are in the process of passing their own anti-troll bills. And some of these bills have been so broad that they're essentially potentially sweeping out the baby with, or losing the baby with the bathwater, whatever that saying is. So for example, the first version of a bill in Virginia would have really said that the universities are the equivalent of entities that never manufacture anything. We're never going to manufacture a product, but if we follow our obligations under public policy to find partners capable of advancing something to the marketplace quickly, I would submit that's a very different activity. Technically, perhaps we're non-practicing because we're not manufacturing and selling, but we're getting it into the hands of a practicing entity in accordance with the law and accordance with our own policies and procedures. So we've been able in Virginia to insert a provision that exempts universities from some of the more onerous parts of that patent troll bill. Other states have some scary legislation, and my fear is it's going to disadvantage universities and disadvantage the very kinds of startup companies that you've heard today from being able to effectively defend their IP. So that's, secondly, with respect to the America Invents Act, it really has not been a major problem. Many people thought it was a sky is falling moment when we went to, first to file, first inventor to file. We have pretty much taken the approach, and I think you probably gleaned this from Reza's presentation, that we're pretty aggressive about getting provisionals filed as early as possible. We've educated our research community on the critical nature of working with us to pick that correct time and develop that correct IP strategy. So we see the America Invents Act to have been, really not no problem for us in how we manage IP. Yes, sir. One more question.
Thank you. My name is John Graham from the National Center for Policy Analysis, and I noticed on your slide when you talk about the new model at UVA, you had venture philanthropy on there, and I thought your robot for autism is an obvious candidate for venture philanthropic investment. So I wonder if either of you could comment from your experience, lessons learned or best practices when you're partnering with a philanthropic investor versus a more traditional commercial investor, the tensions there and how you manage that.
Sure. So the difference would be between a the different types of VCs is the question, correct? Yeah, it's it's interesting. VCs have changed a lot over the last 8 or 10 years in that they used to take a technology like this, and yours is probably different. It's a big breakthrough, and say, okay, great, we can put the team around it, we can do the different things that we need to make this thing viable. And now they're really wanting to, literally, I would not even go to any of these VCs without my first, the data set from the first clinical trials, people who have pre-ordered the product. And so it doesn't really matter as much what type of VC. They're very much, because these things are moving so quickly, they want to see traction and they want to see market validation before we even approach them. And so that's the difference. It doesn't necessarily, in terms of the type of VC, that's really a function of their portfolio strategy and the kinds of things they invest in. As an entrepreneur, I can't even get in there yet until I have, here's some data that shows that it's actually working and people are going to buy it or buying it. So it's a little bit different based on the industry, but that's the challenge that I face. And it's really all about aligning with a venture capitalist that has a strategy that matches kind of your product and your industry.
If I may, I'd like to say something quickly as well. I see venture philanthropy as one of the most critical tools in our toolkit these days, and it's a relatively recent phenomenon. But again, doing this a long time, I would say that 10 or 15 years ago, if we had filed a patent in the US and had a half-baked business plan, and someone like Reza or Jalali who were interested in maybe moving from the lab to the company, we could go raise venture capital. I use a football field analogy. Universities take the ball in our research from the 0 to the 20. We used to do a handoff to VC or industry at about the 30. So we had a 10-yard valley of death. The VCs and industry are at the other 20 now. There's a 60 or wider valley of death. Venture philanthropy is one of the critical tools to help us get through that divide, because they are very much focused on market and patient and customer needs, but we're not having to stop and negotiate a valuation or some of the other challenges before we all know if it'll work. And as Jalali said, we're creating new markets. This is a disruptive technology. We don't know how big that market is. We have a pretty good idea that it's huge, but why stop now and go through all of that? If we can get through that valley of death inside the university and with key partners like venture philanthropists, we can do a lot better job of creating investor-ready, market-ready, proof-of-concept proven innovation assets. Sorry.
Incredible. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. So now we come to the fun part of the program where we actually get to present the awards. So with that, I want to thank you all for that amazing conversation and discussion on innovation, and would like to ask David Hirschman to present the University of Virginia, if Mark and Rez, if you guys will come up. And thank you, present our first IP Champion Award of the day to UVA Innovation for your work with bridging the gap from innovation to entrepreneurship. Thank you very much. And now we'd like to thank and present Roboto Inc. for your innovations and cutting-edge technology to treat autism through robots. And again, thank you to all the panelists. One more round of applause for them. Thank you. Okay, if I can now ask David Warr and the other panelist for the second panel to come up. David Warr is the United States Chief Representative and Director of Government Relations at the International Trademark Association. He is joining us as a moderator for a panel with representatives from organizations who've developed creative and educational consumer awareness campaigns. So with that, we'll ask them to the stage.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. David will be introducing each of the different panelists and the campaigns in a moment, but I'd like to take this opportunity, if I can, if we are broadcasting this live via webcast on our website, so if you guys want to make sure your offices and families are watching you, it is on our webpage at globalipcenter.com/IPChampions. So we'll get everybody settled, and then Mr. Warr will introduce the other panelists.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. I want to first introduce the panelists sitting here on stage with me. Joining me to my right is Marjorie Clifton with the Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies, Libby Bainey, the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies, Alan Jones with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, and Chuck Westfall with Canon USA. Let me give a little more detail about these people that have joined me, and then I'll give a brief overview as to why this panel is presenting. Our first presenters will be Marjorie Clifton, and Libby Bainey. My name is mispronounced every day of the week. Marjorie is Executive Director, as I said, for the Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies. She is also a published author, and you may have seen her on CNN and Fox, as well as you might have heard her on national radio as a commentator. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Texas, and surprisingly, I was very surprised to read this, a master's from the Drama Studio in London. Libby Bainey, to my right, is the Executive Director for the Alliance of Safe Online Pharmacies. In this capacity, Libby is responsible for the operation, policy, and advocacy for our organization. She's a graduate of Indiana University and also a graduate of that university's law school. Chuck Westfall, on the far left here, is Technical Advisor for the Professional Engineering and Solutions Division of Canon USA. Most recently, Chuck has been developing content for online and on-site consumer education projects in Canon's USA Professional Products Engineering and Solutions Division. Chuck received his degree in professional photography from the Rochester Institute of Technology, founded in 1829.
But I wasn't there then.
Well, let's hope not. Alan Jones is the Chief of Communications and Advocacy for the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crimes, where he's responsible for all corporate communications, outreach, and advocacy functions. He holds a master's in European law and a degree in politics and languages. I found it quite interesting in doing some research on Alan that he was involved in one of the world's largest construction projects, the Eurotunnel, doing public relations for them. So it must have been very interesting.
It was very challenging.
So, why this panel? Well, the infringement of the legal rights of an owner's intellectual property is becoming a rapidly growing issue. The International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition is estimating that counterfeits have grown some 10,000% in the past 2 decades. The advancement of technology in this era of globalization has thrown open a wide array of choices to consumers as it relates to products and services, leaving the consumer very vulnerable to a plethora of problems associated with this rapid change. These panelists will highlight those problems as well as highlight the intellectual property efforts their respective organizations have created to educate consumers about how best to deal with these problems associated with these bad products and services being presented over the internet and other places. Our first panelist will be to my right, Marjorie. Marjorie will present, and Libby will chime in as appropriate.
Great, and we're going to show the videos, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, just to tee it up, so as you got from my background, I have a communications background and do coalition development. And what we've done at the Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies, for those of you who don't know who we are, we're 13 different internet service providing companies that have been dealing specifically with the issue of illegal online pharmacies, which is a growing threat as a growing number of consumers start using the internet to buy their prescription drugs. And we can tell, even anecdotally, some personal stories related to why this is an issue. But what our companies have really wanted to do, and what they've found is, especially given that we've got Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and Facebook and companies that are very consumer facing, in a position that they can reach consumers at the point of purchase, which is when they're searching or they're going to buy prescription drugs. So consumer education, again, one of our key focuses, and so what we did was put together some public service announcements through a couple of different methods. And we ran a competition through an organization called Tongle, which basically reached out to universities and film students and other filmmakers across the country, educated them on the issue, again, the growing number of illegal online pharmacies, and asked them to create a PSA that would help educate people around the issue. And what we got was more submissions than we could have ever imagined. We had close to 500 PSAs that were sent to us, and in the competition narrowed it down to our top 10 favorites. And we are running those through search ads on Google and Microsoft platforms, so that when consumers go and search for whatever it is prescription drug they're looking for, they get our PSAs, which basically tell them you need to be cautious about the number of illegal sites and to find a safe channel to purchase. And it directs them to a link where they can check a pharmacy checking tool that allows them to identify safe platforms for purchasing. So what we have is a PSA that we'll show today, which sort of introduced the organization, introduced the problem. I encourage you to go to our website, Safe Meds Online, where we have all of our other PSAs. There were so many good ones, and they were funny, and some were scary, and it had so many different flavors to them, but they've been wildly successful. We've had close to, what, Katie, 5 million views on Google and Microsoft just since we launched it in October. So it's getting an incredible response online. It's been great. Are we ready? Let's roll it. We're all good at spotting a fake, right? But would you bet your family's life on it? Every day, millions of life-saving drugs are bought online. But did you know a vast majority of online pharmacies are actually illegal? Which means you don't know how the drugs were made and whether they're safe. And you could be buying counterfeit drugs from anywhere in the world. Drugs that are fake, or worse, drugs that can kill and have.
Buying drugs online can be a dangerous proposition. Fake pills are popping up everywhere.
In Colombia, drugs were made using sheetrock and rat poison.
Most people think they can spot sellers of fake drugs online, but actually, it's much harder than you think. And the criminals know this and profit at your loved one's expense. Well, that's not right. So for the first time, we got this team together to take on the problem. Our partners have already taken down thousands of bad sites, and we're just getting started. But we can't do this alone. If you know someone who buys their prescription drugs online, consider sharing this with them so they can make sure they're getting the safe medicines, not fakes. Learn more on our website and make sure you know who you're buying from. Be safe, buy smart. Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies. And one other thing I'll add is just in this last year alone, our companies collectively took down close to 5 million illegal sites through our data sharing portal and through collaboration. So this was again at our launch, and if you check out our website, there's about 5 other PSAs. Some of them are funny and different tones to them, but they're a lot of fun.
I'll add, so I'm Libby Bainey from the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies, and our organization is comprised of healthcare stakeholders, and so we're very supportive of the work that Marjorie and her organization do day in and day out to make the internet safer for patients. And one of the things we wanted to do was partner with CSIP and their member companies in creating the advertisement that you saw, both this advertisement and the others that are available on both our website and hers, because we felt like consumers constantly are asking me and the members of our board, how do I know what sites are legitimate? How do I know how to find safe medicines online? Should I be buying online? And many of you may be familiar with the statistics, but 97% of internet pharmacies operating today are out of compliance with the applicable laws. That means approximately 3% of the sites that you find are compliant, and so at any given time a consumer is more likely than not, obviously, to find a rogue site, a site that's selling counterfeit, substandard, adulterated, unapproved, misbranded, expired products on the internet that can hurt patients. And so as we represent the public health side of the equation, we really wanted to partner with the internet companies who understood their role in the solution, and we felt like that was an important messenger to be able to carry carry the message to a new audience, because the public health community talks about this a lot, and in some cases we're very aware of the dangers of internet purchasing. I was speaking with the gentleman here who said, oh, I know, just buy on VIPs. And that's a very enlightened individual, because someone understands in this audience what a verified internet pharmacy practice is, a defined safe site. But the vast majority of people don't understand that. And so having a new messenger with Marjorie and her companies able to convey this in a platform on the internet through search advertisements has been a very effective way for our issue to be raised with a new audience. So we really appreciate the work that they've done on this.
Very good, ladies. Very interesting information. Before I ask questions, I'm going to move to Chuck Westfall and ask Chuck to present on what his company is doing in terms of consumer awareness.
Okay, thank you. I think I want to start off first by just giving a short background. Canon is pretty much a household name in this country by now. Just to give you an idea that we are a global company based in Japan, but we have operations all over the world. Globally, our annual sales are in the $40 billion range, and we plow about 8% of our income back into research and development to keep ourselves at the top of our markets. We have #1 market share in digital cameras and have had it for about 10 years straight. So you can understand from a background like that, and with the kind of stake that we have in basically maintaining a forward momentum in our company, that there is a large concern about anti-counterfeiting, because basically not only is it diminishing the integrity of the Canon brand, but probably more important, it is putting our customers at risk, not only to damage their equipment, but potentially to even, in worst case, have bodily harm from, for example, exploding batteries or chargers, products that basically were not designed to any kind of safety standard that we have to design our products to meet. So, recognizing this issue, we did launch an anti-counterfeit campaign in January 2013 to promote awareness of the industry-wide consumer electronics issue of the risks of using counterfeit accessories for digital cameras and camcorders. Our concern really is mostly to protect our customers who rely on the integrity and reliability that has become associated with our brand. Safety education is our main goal. We also want to identify the fact that counterfeiting, and this has already been expressed, is a worldwide issue. Within the last 12 months, there have been 80 seizures just in the United States, which resulted in the seizure of over 24,000 counterfeit batteries, 30,000 counterfeit power adapters, and 57,000 power chargers, counterfeit chargers. So this is a serious issue, and one of the things that we really wanted to do by starting our campaign was to raise consumer awareness, because what we determined was that over 99% of the counterfeit supplies that are sold in the United States are done over the internet, and in many cases through kind of fly-by-night type operations where they're putting up images online of our legitimate products and then delivering the counterfeits to the customers. And the customers don't know until they get them that they have received a counterfeit product. And in some cases, the counterfeits are getting so good in terms of their appearance that it's very, very difficult to tell exactly whether it's a real or a fake. And in light of that, we developed a video that we're going to show you, just a kind of a brief compilation of some of the top pieces here from that video that we put into our anti-counterfeiting campaign. We call it Spot the Fake. So if we could run that.
Hello there.
Jamie.
My name's Maria. Katie, nice to meet you. Pleasure. Would you mind putting that camera right here on this red X? So I'm not sure if you know this, but counterfeit batteries, chargers, and other power accessories, not only are they extremely hard to spot, they can do a lot of harm to your camera, they can do a lot of harm to you. They can melt, they can smoke, they can explode. Do you think you have what it takes to spot a counterfeit battery?
I would say yes.
Yeah?
I think I could do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah? Great. If you successfully find the counterfeit, you could get a genuine battery today. Now lay them out there, really take a look. Sorry, before you start, if you incorrectly pick the battery, I'm gonna smash your camera with this hammer.
Wait, what?
I'm gonna burn your camera.
You're gonna burn my camera?
So you can't tell which one the counterfeit is, huh?
Nah, I can't tell.
I really want to let you know that this acid's gonna do the same thing that a counterfeit battery could. It'll destroy your camera.
Wow.
I'm not convinced that I'm going to be able to tell the difference.
I just need a yes or no if you're willing to try this right now.
No.
My camera is worth more than a counterfeit battery.
Make sure you play it safe and avoid counterfeits at all costs. Here's 3 great tips to help you do it. Purchase genuine batteries, chargers, and other power accessories from reputable sources, such as authorized dealers or directly from the manufacturer. Be careful when purchasing through foreign sites, and beware of too good to be true prices. For more information, visit usa.canon.com/aboutcounterfeits.
So hopefully, through that, you can kind of see a little bit of the glimpse of the type of problem that we face. And this anti-counterfeiting campaign, of course, we did launch the microsite. We also have got, brochures available. And if you look at your table, hopefully there's still one there for you to find that explains the problem and actually shows in graphic detail how a defective battery can actually melt a charger. So that's the kind of information that we're trying to make people aware, basically, of the issue. It's not just about Canon, but it's about the entire consumer electronics industry, where we're trying to make sure that people can protect themselves from, potential damage caused by counterfeit goods.
Thank you, Chuck. Alan?
Thank you, David. UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Sounds a little bit ominous. Yes, I am at the right event. I've not made a mistake, and I have arrived at the IP Congress here. What do we do at the UN office? Somebody's phone, probably mine. Oops. Well, drugs, crime, organized crime, terrorism, corruption, all the things that we probably don't want to hear about, we hope that somebody is dealing with. We hope that somebody else is protecting us and taking care of us. We think that probably the drugs issue the narcotic drugs issue is far distant from this issue, and it is most of the time. However, if you think about the narcotic drug conventions at the United Nations, they were brought in to protect public health. So again, you can start to see why the UN Office on Drugs and Crime is interested in this issue. Yes, we are interested in organized crime and trying to reduce its strength. We're trying to reduce demand. We have a convention on organized crime. And I have to admit, we didn't start off by looking at the IP issue or looking at counterfeit goods. We started off by looking at issues such as money laundering, illicit flows of goods. We have a container control program which is looking for illicit goods in containers globally, and in a third of the cases has found counterfeit goods. So even when we weren't looking for it, we found it. So a lot of our studies as well has linked the proceeds of organized crime groups to counterfeit. $250 billion globally is a figure that is used. And there's no doubt that the counterfeit industry is an illicit criminal activity. It's a form of organized crime. And within that, there are groups, people, networks, which are even involved in serious organized crimes, such as drug trafficking, and in some instances, it has been documented also terrorism and other issues. So we have a mandate under the UN Convention on Organized Crime to inform the public about the different forms of organized crime. And when we see the size of this industry, we decided to use the counterfeit as an issue, as an area to inform about the different aspects of organized crime. Also, we're working on other issues, such as wildlife crime. These groups don't hesitate to traffic in rhino horn or other illicit goods. So you can see the type of groups and illicit networks that we are focusing on. But my role, and a role which I'm very, very proud of and very excited about, I've spent more than half of my professional career working on protecting public health. I worked in the European Union for the US equivalent of the FDA and OSHA for over 10 years on campaigns and raising awareness about consumer and public safety. Was our aim to reduce demand and also inform policymakers about the strategic links and interactions between the counterfeit industry or business and organized crime groups. So we started looking at the messages that we should use. We started looking at the big ethical question, organized crime. No one wants to support organized crime. But when you scratch the surface behind a lot of these products, the networks that provide them, there are organized criminal groups involved in delivering these illicit goods to the public. We looked also at the ethical and social issues related to the production, distribution, dissemination of these issues, from the labor issues to other more sinister links in some parts of Europe involving migrant smuggling. We looked at the health and safety, which is a big issue which has been dealt with today. If there's one issue that should motivate the consumer, it's their own self-preservation. But it seems that this is not always the case. So we're asking, and we asked in our campaign, consumers to look behind the products that they might buy on the marketplace in Africa, on the web in America. We asked, and we're asking policymakers also, to look at the information that we've brought together on the links between organized crime networks and this illicit industry. To support the campaign, we put together a paper which you may have all received on the different links between the various ethical considerations on counterfeit. So we developed a video, and then we worked with partnerships, and thanks to organizations, media houses such as CNN, Bloomberg, CNBC, and Fox, we've been able to put our video on international and national platforms across the world. Up till today, I can say over 30 important TV channels, and reaching millions of people globally with this message, asking people to look behind. Now, if I could ask you to look behind the video, please. would like to say and also thank and inform you that this campaign has been supported not only by many of the international and national TV stations, but also by the US State Department International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Office, which has been very supportive, and also the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in addition to our normal UN resources and networks. Thank you.
Thank you all. Now we'll open the panel up to questions. This is a very interesting topic. And most of you have mentioned the internet as the culprit. So I want to throw out a question to all of you. Recognizing the fact that the internet is so big, is it even feasible for us to think that we can combat this problem? And you can jump in at any time.
Well, I'll start. I think that it's actually, you know, an opportunity. You know, it is so big, and it gives everybody the opportunity to reach out to their customers or to anybody that is interested in listening, to raise awareness about the issue. You know, yes, it's the internet is the vehicle through which all these counterfeits are actually marketed, but then to turn it back on them, you know, is our goal, to raise awareness so that customers will try to understand what it is that they're ordering. And I'm sure that you have the same concern.
And I would say, I mean, in the online pharmacy space, which is sort of a unique product area, I mean, it has opened up opportunity for reach, for accessibility, for, you know, price comparison, things that benefit, I think, all markets and all products. You know, we know right now that pharmaceuticals are the 11th most purchased product right now on the internet, and is growing, and as people's comfort with buying online. But like with anything, when you open up a new market, there's the need for both consumer responsibility and education, but also for you know, responsibility on the part of law enforcement and companies and otherwise. So you know, right now everything's new, and as we're seeing in the whole cybersecurity domain, we're having to sort of make this up and regulate as we go and figure out ways to manage it. But again, that's what gives me a lot of hope with, you know, our board and our partner companies, as well as all the other players involved in this. But it will require global support, and I think that's the biggest challenge right now. While in the United States there's a lot of waves being made to manage and to educate, having other partner companies and countries involved is really important for us.
Yeah, I would add to that, Marjorie, because I think we are seeing U.S. companies and stakeholders step up to the plate on this issue, and you know, we meet regularly with law enforcement, thinking about how does law enforcement interact internationally as well. And so there's a law enforcement component to this, but you can't regulate the internet in the same way that you can deal with brick and mortar operations in a state or in a country. And so we've found, you know, at least in internet pharmacy world, a lot of those rogue pharmacies are clustering at 10 or 12 registrars that are often based overseas. There's one actually based here in the United States that's in the top 10 most currently, but they're most often based overseas. And so what we really need to do is be able to cluster the bad guys, if I can call them that generally, at these registrars and registries, and then be able to use multilateral law enforcement interaction, public pressure, political pressure, and best practices from other countries and other companies to put pressure on those entities that are harboring the criminals. And because they will cluster, I mean, they will naturally migrate to places that are knowingly facilitating internet crime. And so if we can shift from an open, you know, it's everywhere platform to the worst of the worst on certain platforms, we can then target those with enforcement operations and international political pressure. And so we're seeing success in that, but it will take time.
And we are hearing from law enforcement that there is a lot of overlap in products as well. It's not just a concentrated drug seller, but they also work in other counterfeit goods, and they are concentrated groups of criminals. But I will reiterate the importance of our educating consumers and putting responsibility on consumers as well in all of these areas, because whether online or on the streets of New York, counterfeiting exists in a broad spread way. But what we're learning is that the lack of understanding on the part of consumers about what the implications are, which is why I think your UN video is brilliant as well in terms of how it connects that.
That's an interesting segue, Alan, because I'm curious as to, you are affiliated with the International Governing Organization. What are some of the challenges you have faced in putting your program together?
Well, I can come to that in a minute, but I wanted to, the question about the internet, it was you used the word could, and I think it's should. The internet, I mean, we have to look at the internet. I mean, our office is looking at the internet not from this sole perspective, but looking at the cybercrime issue and how the internet could be used as a facilitating tool for criminal activities. And it's quite concerning to us. I mean, in the US and Europe, you probably have fairly good control over the internet, relatively speaking. But our concern now is, as the internet takes off in other continents, in different areas where the rule of law is not at the same level, this could create challenges beyond our imagination for law enforcement, because if already it's a cat and mouse game with criminal groups, then the internet will create an even wider challenge. But coming to the question about our organization, we had a convention that was adopted only 10 years ago. It's quite young. It's a new convention on organized crime. And we're now beginning to explore the potential of that convention in the United Nations. It might sound quite broad, but what it does, it is also positive in the sense that it can help us look at all forms of crime, all forms of organized criminal activity. And obviously counterfeiting comes into that. Wildlife crime, the trafficking of rhino horn comes into that, and so does cybercrime. So we have a mandate to use this convention and develop it with the support of the member states to actually try and create a more safer framework to counter criminal activities. Our own organization, and this is something that is not uncommon even to the US, our law enforcement is focusing, or is traditionally focused on narcotics, guns, the trafficking of people. But the organized crime groups are evolving. They're innovating. They're spreading into new opportunities. And I think the problem is the internet has provided the legitimate business community with opportunities, but it's also provided the illegitimate business community with opportunities. And we need to keep up with that development.
Guys, I would be remiss if I didn't plug my association's campaign, Unreal campaign, that focuses on teens about the problems associated with counterfeit goods. I'm curious from my panelists as to how they decided to target the audiences they targeted. Why didn't they choose teens? Or if they did, or did they choose an older audience? So,
well,
Marjorie?
I mean, I can say we're actually engaged right now with the Partnership for Drug-Free America, who has done widespread education about, they have the Safe Medicine Project, which focuses on safe use of prescription drugs and the rise of prescription drug abuse among the teen audience. So we're actually embarking on a partnership with them. We're developing an online quiz to help educate teens and their parents also about not only prescription drug abuse, but safe purchasing and safe use of prescription drugs for exactly that reason. The audiences we chose, what we're seeing and what FDA research showed was the top consumers of prescription drugs online was the 50+ market. And, you know, again, it falls into that sort of 20 to 50 audience as well. It really impacts everyone, which is hard to do. So we've been targeting specific groups at different times, again, to help people understand. Now, you dive into prescription drugs, you get into bigger healthcare debates, cost of prescription drug issues and other, but what we are finding is the reason people do go buy online is price and convenience. So a lot of it is also educating consumers on what constitutes a valid prescription, you know, that you are required to have a valid prescription to buy, and so there's a lot of education required on our part. But the teen audience, again, we're seeing is a rising, I mean, I warn you, the more you learn about this stuff, the more frightening it becomes if you have children, because everyone ran out of the last event we had from Partnership with Drug-Free America going, I just want to go home and hug my kids and tell them not to use prescription drugs. So it was you know, there's a lot of learning as parents as well that we can do on these issues.
I'll add to that just that, you know, segmenting the market is difficult on these issues, and we do rely on research of others. We've done our own research on some of these issues, as Marjorie cited, as well as looking at FDA research to try to figure out who's buying online and what are they doing. And you do need to figure out what is the right message to the right audiences, as you all have done so well. And so we're looking now at, you know, turning from the broader sort of 50+ audience, understanding their behaviors. And one of the things I think that was interesting that we found from this partnership was that people do actually want to find safe sites. And so when they clicked and found the public service announcement, they would often continue to click and get to that URL checker. And it's sponsored by LegitScript, and it was, you could put in www.fakemed.com and it would come back and say, red flags, don't use that website, or this is a verified internet pharmacy according to US laws in the case you're a US patient. And so there's a lot of tools that we can drive into these campaigns to help then continue the education as the process moves along. And so even though we were targeting a certain market, you're then educating the parents of the kids who are going to be buying those medicines. So it's a life cycle of education that we're trying to instill while driving people to user-friendly tools, because what we've learned is people actually do want to find legitimate products in most cases. There are the drug abusing side, at least in our issue. There are people that have drug-seeking behavior, and we recognize that. But if you're targeting people, whether it's a Canon camera or a prescription drug, that want to buy a legitimate product but may not be able to tell that it's a fake battery or a fake pill, that's where we need to make sure that consumers have those channels and continue to target those audiences.
And just to add on that, our click-through rates on our search ads are double, actually more than double, almost triple the average click-through rate of any other ad that you see on the internet. Again, reiterating the fact that there are consumers that want good information. And the other is that one of the things we learned in our research as well was that the majority of consumers thought, as you highlighted in your ad, that they could spot the fake, that they would know what was legitimate and what wasn't. They said, oh, we're educated, we know the difference. So a lot of times when we're out speaking about this, we'll show side-by-side comparisons of the fake website versus the legitimate site. Most people can't tell the difference. And also we're fighting this press around, Canadian websites are the safe place to buy. Well, guess what? All of the Russian and Chinese and other networks where there's large criminal concentrations are now Canadian pharmacy sites because there's sort of an impression with consumers that that's the safe way to buy.
So in our case, when we looked at the situation that we were facing, one of the things we did right away was to try to identify, well, how many potential users are there that are exposed to these products? And we found that just in looking at our own issue of just Canon, not the whole industry, we identified the fact that from the beginning of our sales of digital cameras, which started in roughly 1995, 1996 timeframe until now, we have sold globally over 250 million cameras. Now, I'm not trying to impress you. What I'm trying to tell you is that there are so many people out there who are exposed to our products that we really don't have any need necessarily to segment, particular to one age group or one, any other, small segment. Everybody who's out there is at potential risk. And so, our objective with all of these customers is essentially the same, which is to raise awareness. And the efforts that we have done over the last 2 years have started to bear fruit. We've started to see where people are recognizing that this is an issue that they need to be concerned about, and that hopefully they will, make their decision about buying a genuine product before it's too late.
I know Alan wants to chime in on this one, but I'm going to ask another question. As I was listening to the panelists on this question, their responses to this question, I'm curious as to whether or not you actually think these campaigns will change behavior, because we've found in our research that the audience that we are targeting don't really have a moral obligation to change their behavior. Why not buy a counterfeit good? It's cheaper, so it looks the same. Why not?
Alan, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, again, just I can be quick on the target audience. Our campaign is out there really for over 190 countries to use. So focusing on different target groups with 190 countries is not always straightforward. But what I can say, and I think that the video did resonate with people here, is that this video is playing in Cambodia, it's playing in South Africa, Argentina, and it's playing in the US. And I think that what we've done in the past is create videos on issues that need to be top of mind for policymakers and consumers. And those videos on human trafficking, for example, are still being used after 10 years. So I think it's a long haul. And that really goes into your question you just asked me, not trying to avoid it, is about, we're in for the long haul. We have to keep chipping away and providing information to people so that a notion becomes a fact and a fact becomes an action, that people do take their own responsibility. I've had this question several times, and there was a big beverage producer that received a lot of consumer action recently. I don't want to say the name. And it had to change its tax practices. So it does show that consumers, when they become aware, when they think something is the right thing to do, when they themselves apply CSR, and this is not about corporate social responsibility, it's about consumer social responsibility, then I think things can change. But this is going to take time.
I mean, in our case, it's a little bit of a different learning curve because it's people's lives at stake. And I think one of the things we're trying to help people understand, and actually Libby can speak to this, the Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies is engaging in physician education, because what we're finding is one of the biggest culprits are physicians themselves referring patients to these sites. In our case, we're looking at placebos or the wrong formulas or people, potentially taking rat poison or other things that they're finding in some of these prescription drugs. I come from a medical family. My brother and my father are both physicians, and I got a call from one of them the other day because their medication, their prescription name brand had been dropped from the plan. So they call me, they go, "You work on this stuff." So I went online, there's 15 different sites to buy from. The prices are all over the place. Which one should I buy from? And so we went through each of those. All 15 of them, when we did the pharmacy checker, were rogue sites. All 15. Again, this is a man who used to be chairman of neurosurgery from one of the largest hospital systems in the entire country, was like, I have no idea where I'm supposed to buy from. So we ended up going to the VIPS list on the NABP, the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy website. This is not an easy process. It is not easy for people to understand. But he, as he looked at the packaging, said, well, the packaging doesn't even match the actual drug that I'm trying to buy. So again, these are people's health and welfare, so it's categorically we're finding different, and it is changing consumer behavior when they do get the information. In the case of sort of the altruistic, I want to buy from, I mean, unfortunately, you kind of have to scare people a little bit. I mean, I'm scared of buying a big fake battery that would kill my precious Canon camera. I'll tell you right now, it was like, oh my goodness. But we kind of have to scare people into doing it the right thing. But I think people genuinely want to when they have good information.
And I think that also ties into, I think your videos were really nicely done because you also tie into the other crimes that they're associated with. So when you talk about criminal networks, you're fueling international terrorism. There's, you could potentially be harming children that are working in sweatshops. You have potential for your identities to be stolen and financial fraud. Those are also things, in addition to the health issue that we can sort of own on, at least on the internet pharmacy side. The other issues I think are just as relevant, and when you talk about having to call your credit card company and cancel your cards because it's being used overseas, people somehow get that now because we understand financial fraud. And so I do think those, as we're learning more about internet savviness, those messages will continue to resonate. And I really appreciated, Alan, your comments of from a notion becomes action. It just takes some time, and I think that's a really nice way of putting it.
So with our issue right here, when we're talking about either batteries or chargers in digital cameras, you're always talking about electrical power in one form or another. I mean, that's basically what the bottom line is. And any time that you have electrical power as an issue, there is a potential for damage caused by explosions or heat buildup or what have you. And the point that you were raising about the difference between a legitimate product and a counterfeit product is exactly that. The counterfeit product is not manufactured to the safety standards that we must use when we're developing these products. And the customers, if they can't spot the difference, are putting themselves at risk.
Looking at your videos, they're wonderful products for consumer awareness projects. I know some people in the audience may be interested in doing campaigns of their own. Can you share with us some of the pitfalls you might have experienced in developing your your programs, and what are some of the best practices you might have developed in putting your programs together? And you can jump in.
Well, I'll say one thing coming from, and I'm sure Canon would agree, it's not that we want to discourage consumers from buying online and scare them out of that altogether, because it is an amazing tool. It does create reach, all the things we talked about. So I think it's creating a healthy balance between it's okay to purchase online, you just need to be educated in how to be educated. So I would say that's probably our biggest challenge. The other is just, again, are ever chasing good information about who's buying and the broad landscape of people who are buying, because it does kind of impact everyone. It's not like other products where it's targeted towards one very specific demographic. It's a much broader group. So I'd say those are the two challenges we deal with. And striking the right balance of watchability and not scaring people too much, but sincerely relaying a gravity towards the impact of purchasing.
Marjorie, were you able to come up with best practices as you were developing your program?
For consumers? Yes. I mean, I think our pharmacy checking tool is really the safest thing we can bet, and it's more just saying, here are the things you need to know. You may think you can identify it, you may think you know everything, but really this is the only way we know to verify this is a safe place. We have, though, however, developed principles of participation for our member companies, which say these are the standards by which all of our companies operate in, and being part of this coalition, and recommendations for other companies who want to do what we do to create safe platforms for consumers.
What we're doing is we're running a lot of different campaigns to try and raise the self-awareness on this point. And in particular, I'll just reference back to that microsite that we talked about in the video, which is the usa.canon.com/about-counterfeiting. Because when you do that, when you go to that site, one of the things you're able to do is to go through a quiz. There's 10 different products that are up there, and we show you the real and the fake and ask you to identify which one is which. And I'll challenge anybody in this room to get a perfect score. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. But the other thing that we are doing as well is that if you get to the point where you'd like more help, and you'd like to be able to get more information about the particular product that you own, we provide a toll-free number for people to call, and we will help them directly to identify whether their product is real or not. We also point them to the stopfix.gov website, which is a federal site that addresses the overall issue, not just our issue.
You don't have to unless you want to.
Well, there was one thing, and I think there's nowhere more appropriate than the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to sort of share this learning, actually, that we had in developing the campaign. I mean, we're speaking to the like-minded here, and when we developed this campaign and we put it together, there were, there's only probably a handful of countries in the world that are trying to lead and raise awareness on this issue, or who are championing this issue. And I think that there are, you probably noticed from our campaign, we don't touch on the hard IP protection and the labor, the economic protectionist issues that are often used in international fora. We deliberately avoided those issues because we felt that the messages were stronger when they were evidence-based, coming from a United Nations organization, that we could create a series of messages that unified everybody across the world and that resonated. And I think that what our learning is that when you're working on these campaigns, you have to focus on what we have in common. So what the US has in common with other countries from whichever continent is definitely the ethical, the social issues, the environmental issues, the consumer health and safety issues. I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about protecting IP. I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about jobs in Europe or the US or whatever. These are arguments that have their place. But this campaign shows that there's a lot to talk about in other areas where we should unify and unite ourselves. And I think the campaign that you've done on both on the Canon from a safety perspective and the health perspective online are key unifying factors. And I think that by focusing on consumer health and safety and other issues. It enables us to move forward together. And this, for example, I can tell you that in our crime commission in the United Nations in next month of May, there will be a side event that the French government is organizing on consumer health and safety and organized crime issues. So things do lead to other things, and I think when we try and build alliances, and that was also the learning we had from our campaign, building partnerships with others and finding the common ground is the best way forward, and I think that probably all partners here would agree with that.
That was just the only things I were going to add is the importance of partnership. Yeah. That we did learn a lot about working together and the value of bringing different messengers to a common interest. Because as we all work together to fight fakes, generally we had an aligned interest in working together on our minor, in this case, issue, but a sub-issue of internet pharmacies. And so we did find a lot of value in working together and collaborating with stakeholders, both governments and law enforcement, and certainly in the private sector as well. And then I also mentioned the importance of giving consumers that voice. And so Marjorie mentioned the Tongo campaign that we ran to try to have patients and consumers educating themselves about the issue and creating self-generated content to then educate your peers. And we found that to be incredibly valuable, rich with information and indeed insights into how consumers are addressing these issues. So when we got 500 videos back, we learned something about the people themselves that were trying to make the videos that maybe they didn't quite understand the issue, or the data that we presented to them to use, to infuse in their own videos. They didn't really understand it. And so we had to retool and come back with them better facts, better information, different messaging, because our message wasn't resonating to the people that were creating the videos. And so we learned a lot from that give and take process with the content creators themselves. And then from there, this is something that we want to try to do more globally, is Fight the Fakes, a campaign that's being launched and run by IFPMA, is indeed another way that consumers can get out their voices and take individual videos and talk about their own experiences. And so we found the individual experience, the importance of consumers having a stake in their own health, in our case, it resonates with individuals and also leads to that multiplier effect as they're educating themselves and their peers.
As you can tell, we could talk about this all day, but our time is out. Thank you all for participating on this panel. Thank you, audience. Can you give our panelists a round of applause?
Thank you all very much. Fabulous job, an incredibly engaging conversation. Back to the fun part again, though, the actual presentation of the awards. So with that, we've welcomed David Hirschman back to the stage and would like to present the first one to the Be Safe, Buy Smart campaign. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, next, Canon USA with the Anti-Counterfeiting Consumer Awareness Campaign. Thank you. And finally, the Don't Buy Into Organized Crime by the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. Let's give our panelists one final round of applause. Thank you. And thank you to David Ward for doing such an excellent job moderating. So with that, we will be moving to another consumer awareness effort, and I'd like to welcome Sandra Astars to the stage to introduce our next awardee. Sandra is the president and CEO of the Copyright Alliance and is a great partner with the GIPC. An attorney and former vice president, associate general counsel at Time Warner, she now leads an organization who represents artists, producers, distributors from across the copyright spectrum. And with that, Sandra, we'll welcome you to the stage. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I am very, very honored today to be invited by GIPC to introduce my friend David Lowery to receive the U.S. Chamber's IP Champions Award for his work on raising consumer awareness about IP issues. For those of you who don't know David, David is a musician, he's a business person, he's an educator, and he's an artists' rights advocate. I first saw David perform with his band, Camper Van Beethoven, in the mid-'80s when I was a college student at Bard College. He's remembered there for his musicianship. His band's remembered for a few antics in the faculty dining room, which we won't go into, but I've gotten to know David over the years working on artist advocacy issues, and his work there has been truly stellar and has really, I think, begun to change the dialogue around copyright issues, at least in the artist community. David, as I said, started the band Camper Van Beethoven in the 80s, and he started another band, Cracker, in the 90s. He's also worked as a producer with other bands, including Counting Crows and Sparkle Horse. He's also currently teaching courses in the music business to roughly 300 students at the Terry College of Business at University of Georgia, and working towards a doctorate degree there as well. So soon we'll be able to call him Dr. Lowry on top of all of his other credentials. He is known for his musicianship, but I think the thing that I want to talk a little bit about this morning is really what he's been doing the last couple of years in terms of artist advocacy. I've known him, and I'm not sure exactly how the connection was made at this point, but a couple of years. It happened, after what I'll refer to as a dark period in artist advocacy about 2 years ago. And getting to know David and getting to know his wife, Velina, who is a music promoter and a really influential business person in the music community herself, has really been kind of the silver lining to the aftermath of legislation we were debating a few years ago, for me at least. Many of you here, I think, are advocates either for innovators or creative people of various types, and so you know that it can sometimes be dispiriting when you're fighting battles, whether it's on the Hill or in the press, to help people understand the issues that we're all advocating for. We do these things as professional advocates, though. David does this because of his, true personal passion and belief as a musician, as a creative person, because of his belief in the future of music and in the future of musicians and in the future of audiences. And so I think that really separates him a little bit from what we do as professional advocates on a daily basis. I've visited him backstage at concerts more than once, found him working on a blog for The Tricordist, which is his artist advocacy blog that he started a few years ago. Or I've found him puzzling out how a ad for a major brand has ended up on a piracy site or a counterfeiting site, and how to raise this information up more visibly and make people aware of the dangers of that sort of advertising and why that's bad for all of us as consumers and as artists as well. He does all of these things that he does with great energy, with great wit, and with a great understanding of the facts. David is not somebody to kind of go in and gloss over the facts. He really digs down and understands whether it is, how do ads actually get placed on these sites, or whether it's how and why there are so many unlicensed lyric sites, how to identify those and how to get them to actually work and take licenses from songwriters and draw them into the legally operating realm of sites. And so, through his work, he's made a good deal of progress over the last couple of years that's beneficial, I think, to all of us. The award that David is getting today, I think, is significant also because through giving this award, the Chamber is recognizing that there is really a broad base of alliances and coalitions that we have in the IP community, and that we all have to work together because the issues that face us, as whether we're brand owners, patent owners, copyright owners, are all the same issues ultimately. The Chamber and the Copyright Alliance have long been allies on copyright issues, and we are very good complements one to the other because we come at these issues perhaps with different voices and different perspectives, but we come at them with the same core understanding that the laws in this country that support intellectual property owners exist to ensure that creators and innovators of all types are motivated both to create and to disseminate their works to the public, and that ultimately benefits society at large, and that those laws need to be developed and enforced from the perspective of those creators and those innovators to support their further development, their further creativity, their further work. And so by honoring David, the Chamber is demonstrating its understanding that artists are natural allies of innovators of all types in our IP community, and that by building on one another's work in advocacy and awareness raising, we benefit creators and innovators of all types and IP property owners of all types. So finally, I'll just say one more thing, which is that this award is honoring David for his work in raising consumer awareness about IP issues. And in particular, David has done this in a number of ways, from blogging to a letter which I think a lot of you may have seen, I guess about a year and a half or so ago, that he wrote to then NPR intern Emily White, who had done a piece about how she never actually purchased any of the music on her iPod. And David wrote a really heartfelt response as a musician to her, explaining why this generation's approach towards music and creativity generally is really, harmful to artists, to creators, and to themselves. And the impact that failure to stand with artists is having on creativity and culture. And that letter went viral. It made numerous top 10 lists, including New York Magazine's matrix of best things that happened this week, and that's just one example of how influential David has been in communicating to young people and communicating to audiences of all types on these issues. He also, through his work with the business of music students at the University of Georgia, I think is doing a lot of good because, to my mind, the work that you do with students who are the next creators as well as the next audiences is really the most important work that we all can do. By giving these students the tools that they need to succeed in the business world, by giving them the understanding of how the circumstances that currently exist in the ecosystem where their creative works will have to live and survive, affect them. David empowers them to perhaps make a change so that their works have a chance at success, and so that future audiences can also reap the benefits of their work and their creativity and enjoy the sorts of bands that David has given audiences of my generation, and that someday they'll be standing up in front of the Chamber of Commerce and congratulating one of their friends who they've enjoyed listening to for 30 years since they were in college and first hearing their music. So with that, I'm really pleased and really, as I said, honored to introduce my friend David Lowery to say a few words to all of you.
So, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be invited here today, and thank you, Sandra, for that lovely introduction. 31 years ago, I started my adventure in the world of intellectual property when I wrote a song. It's not the biggest hit that I've had, but it's been oddly persistent and rather absurd. It's a song called Take the Skinheads Bowling, and it was designed not to make any sense whatsoever, and I wrote it in about 5 minutes, literally. And a few years later, it was played on the BBC radio and became a hit in England, and that washed back over to the United States. Now, this isn't my biggest hit, but still, to this day, I am constantly requested to play this song. Now, if somebody had come back, said to me at the time that I wrote that song, that in 31 years, you will still be playing this song, I would have said, are you on drugs? Okay? So, standing here in front of the chamber, no offense, but if somebody had also told me 31 years ago that you're going to get an award from the Chamber of Commerce. Remember, I'm wearing a poncho, okay, that I got at a thrift store, and Birkenstocks, and probably ripped up jeans, and I had long hair, and I had a skateboard. 31 years ago, if somebody said you're going to be getting an award from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for advocating for intellectual property, I probably would have asked, are you on counterfeit drugs? So, sorry. I start with a little bad joke there. So what do I do? As Sandra explained, I teach, I write songs, I play music, I produce records. I'm also a bit of a technology investor and entrepreneur. I was trained as a mathematician and as a computer guy at UC Santa Cruz. But anyway, so what I've learned, I just want to share a couple things with you really quick. What I've learned in advocating for intellectual property, in particular, songwriters' rights and copyright, is that when I talk to people about how this is impacting my money, it didn't really go over very well, or it just didn't engage people as much. But when I talk to people about how bad intermediaries were reaping the benefits of my work, suddenly everybody started paying attention and started listening, and they came over to my side, right? Because I think ultimately Americans understand there needs to be a fair playing field. They don't like what I would term market failure, and they want really genuinely to see, equal opportunity. Not equal outcomes, but equal opportunity to sell your goods and to be compensated for them. And that was rather pleasing when I understood finally that that's why consumers gravitated towards my second argument. Secondly, there's been sort of this false choice between technology and intellectual property created. I think that's rather unfortunate, especially myself as a musician, somebody who creates intellectual property, and at the same time having been on the board of advisors to Groupon, currently with some other musicians and music industry types, created a company called Reverb.com. We're a vertical competitor to eBay, and we're doubling in size about every 3 months. I'm also on the board of Angels Athens, Georgia, Athens Angel Fund, and I'm a mentor at the For Athens Tech Incubator. So it's a little odd to me that there's this dichotomy, okay? And, you know, there's a little joke. Again, I was writing my blog one day in the kitchen, and my 14-year-old comes in and wants to talk to me about something. And I was like, is it an emergency? He goes, no. I go, well, let me just finish this blog. He goes, okay, I'll wait till you're done breaking the internet. Right, so. Also, too, last week, one of my sons was playing the game Civilization, whereby you have to choose which technologies you are going to create for your civilization next. And he goes, should I work on the Human Genome Project or the internet? Let's see. Dad won't get paid if I work on the internet, so I'll work on the Human Genome Project. We have a very irreverent relationship, me and my sons, and they know fully well that they're, you know, I know fully well that they're joking with me and they're teasing with me, but this does illustrate what has come to become the divide, that people think you have to choose between intellectual property and technology. I don't believe that to be true. Songwriters are the oldest intellectual property business. Information business, except for authors, they're the oldest information business, or maybe they are older than authors, okay? A company that administers my song publishing goes back 138 years, right? Performers are the ultimate bootstrap businesses. We're the ultimate garage tinkerers who create something in our garage and then sell it globally to the world. We've always been the early ones to adopt technology. We were some of the first businesses to embrace the internet. Virtually all the early websites I saw were banned websites. It's a little bit of a joke, but I've thought about writing a book about this. I really actually think that bands employ highly innovative management techniques. They're highly efficient. And are natural allies of other businesses. And so it's great to be embraced and given this award by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, we'll have David Hirschman come up to actually do the honors of providing you the trophy, but we appreciate your comments, appreciate you being with us, and appreciate your actions and your efforts.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
I'll just point out that a couple of weeks ago, our Hiring Our Heroes function at the Chamber for the second year in a row worked with the rock band KISS to publicize rock bands hiring veterans for their summer tour. So if the Chamber of Commerce can work with KISS, we can certainly work with a distinguished musician and UGA professor. But thank you very much for taking the time to do this and ultimately bringing much needed storytelling to this issue. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so very much. So our next awards will be presented by Mr. William Reed of Eli Lilly and Company. Mr. Reed is Vice President for Global Anti-Counterfeiting Operations, where he leads the development of Lilly's global strategy to protect patent safety by fighting counterfeit medicines, and works with Lilly's global affiliates and cross-function experts to implement that strategy around the world. So with that, Mr. Reed.
All right, that got me a little bit excited because I'm a KISS fan, and I thought maybe you want the loudest band in the world, you got the loudest band in the world, there'd be some intro music, but that didn't happen. I'm not going to sing, don't worry about that. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the opportunity thank you to the Chamber for the opportunity to present two very important IP awards today. I understand this is the second annual IP Champions Conference, but it's the first time the Chamber is awarding internationally focused IP champions. and I commend the Chamber for extending the program and recognizing the important work being done abroad to promote and protect intellectual property. I'm honored to represent Lilly and to present the IP Champions Award to an individual and to a program that are both innovative, inspiring, and truly move the needle on IP protection in the public service sector. Before the first award, I also have to comment, based upon Mr. Lowry's description of Birkenstocks and sandals. As you heard, my role with Lilly and anti-counterfeiting operations, my retired mother, God bless her, I've worn a suit and tie for the better part of 15 years. But when she heard a few years back I was going to work in anti-counterfeiting operations, the story she tells her bridge club in Arizona is that I come to work in combat fatigues and a sidearm every day. If I don't call her for a week, she thinks I'm somewhere in an undercover operation, and it's like, no, Mom, I was just in Florida on spring break. I will let you know where I am on a regular basis. But I work with Lilly and very much enjoy the partnership with the Chamber, with government and other authorities, and the organizations that have been here today and are recognized. The first award goes to Mr. Mark Cohen, Senior Counsel for China at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, for his steadfast support and dedicated work to improve U.S.-China relations on intellectual property for more than 30 years. Mark is a scholar, a published author, a Chinese-speaking attorney, and known worldwide for his knowledge of intellectual property issues in China. He has published numerous books on IP in China, and most recently his own blog, ChinaIPR.com. At Fordham, he teaches the first class offered in the U.S. on China IP law. It is, however, his public service that we want to highlight today. He was the first ever IP attaché at a U.S. embassy in 2004 in Beijing, China. His work in this role became the model for the U.S. government's IP engagement globally. He has conducted a two-part live debate with Chinese academics on WTO issues that had a global audience of 160 million people, and his program with the Federal Circuit Bar Association was one of the largest international judicial training programs in the world. We are extremely grateful for his dedication and willingness to stand at the forefront of capacity building in the U.S.-China bilateral relationship. Mark couldn't be here with us today. I'm sure you can understand he's in China, but we did notify him ahead of time and were able to capture the following message from Mark, if you would roll the tape.
Well, thank you. It's really a great honor to be recognized by my peers, by the U.S. Chamber, with this award, and it's unexpected, which makes it even a greater pleasure. So thank you very much. As I look back on my professional involvement in IP issues in China, and my first reaction when I heard I was getting this award is that the award doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to my colleagues and me at the PTO, because we've worked so hard together. Then I thought about it some more, and I think it really doesn't even just belong to the PTO or to the interagency community, but I think almost all the advances we've made in China have been because we've found common ground to work together, and that we've found that common ground despite some of the differences we may have had at the margins. And I think in China, that common ground is so large that we should be pursuing more things together, particularly as the issues get more complicated. And I was thinking about this because 15 years ago, and this is not shameless promotion, but 15 years ago I wrote this book, Chinese Intellectual Property Law and Practice. And when I wrote it, someone asked me, how big was that book? And I said, well, it was about 500 pages. He said, well, I would think the book would be very thin because there's not much law in China. And reflecting on where we are today, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of places where we need experts and expert involvement, where we need the private sector, companies, we need organizations like the Chamber, we need academics, we need the government. We need each of us to find the optimal way of bringing our messages forward on more complicated issues. And I think if there's an award to really be given, it's for when we cooperate together. The other thing that I think about too is the attaché program, which really came together despite some initial resistance. People seem to forget about that, but because State Department, Commerce, PTO, and the U.S. Chamber and AmCham in particular were very supportive. But there were lots of people who I don't even know, who came through to meet with the patent office or to go up on the Hill and say, gee, there's this guy Mark Cohen, and he's over at the PTO and office in Beijing, and we really like it that there's an attaché there, and we think this program should be expanded. There's a lot of people I don't even know who have helped me out through the years, and that is really gratifying, just like it's really gratifying to be recognized and surprised by this award. So I want to thank you. I want to thank all the people who have worked together with us, and all the nameless people who are out there toiling in the same area that I feel so passionate about.
The second award is given to Operation Cloud, a large-scale nationwide enforcement campaign conducted in 2013 by the Economic Crime Investigation Department of China's Ministry of Public Security. The operation's goal was to disrupt the production, distribution, and online sale of illicit oncology medicines. Due to the innovative investigation and prosecution techniques, Operation Cloud garnered significant results, including 1,300 criminals were arrested. The total seizure value amounted to over 2.2 billion renminbi, equivalent to $350 million US, and the operation was the biggest seizure of fake medicines in China. We hope today's announcement demonstrates how appreciative our sector is and encourages continued focus to address counterfeit pharmaceuticals in China, as the size and scope of the problem remains a challenge. Accepting the award on behalf of the Ministry of Public Security is Counselor Hu Bin-chin, Police Counselor and Chief of the Police Liaison Office with the Chinese Embassy in the U.S., and Deputy Director General of the International Cooperation Department at the Ministry of Public Security.
Thank you very much for your congratulations. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, Vice President Reid, for your kind introduction. And dear President Hirschman, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege for me to come here to receive 2014 Champion Award on behalf of China's Ministry of Public Security's Economic Crime Investigation Department. First of all, I would like to recognize the Global Intellectual Property Center of U.S. Chamber of Commerce for its outstanding leadership in a worldwide effort to champion intellectual property rights. I understand the definition of IP champions as efforts at the forefront of protecting and promoting intellectual property rights. When the Operation Cloud is recognized with this reward, I think we should not forget hundreds and thousands of officers at forefront of the operation against IP crimes. So here, I'd love to share with you a true story. In the Yongchang County, in China's far west Gansu province, there was a police officer named Yang Yongpeng. As economic crime unit chief of the county's police, Mr. Yang devoted himself to IPR protection for nearly 2 decades. In March 2013, Yang was entrusted to investigate an IPR case involving fake and unqualified onion seeds. This case was not complicated, but evidence collection was extremely difficult because the dealers and the victims scattered across the whole country. Yang and his team started their investigative journey without a minute of hesitation. From the far northwest Gansu province to the southeast Anhui, then to the east Shandong and the southeast Jiangsu province, Yang traveled 2,400 kilometers across 9 provinces. He kept interviewing the dealers and the victims at daytime in different cities. For 4 consecutive days, he traveled at night on the train with the hot seat at his bed and instant noodle as meals. On the night when he concluded the evidence collection in a small county of Jiangsu province, he was so overwhelmed by fatigue. He fell asleep that night and never wake up again. At his funeral, his fellow officers saluted to his portrait with tears in their eyes. Yang's smile was still on his face, but unbearable pain was left to his heartbroken wife and a schooling son. Yang is one of the 450 police officers died in line of duty in 2013 in China. 450 in one single year. That is to say, 4 fallen officers every 3 days. What a shocking figure. However, Yang and his IP heroic peers are most true interpretation of China's efforts. With the sweat, blood, and even the precious lives, they interpret our government's commitment to protection and promotion of intellectual property rights. They interpret our law enforcement's zero tolerance towards IP crimes. They interpret our people's pursuit for the justice of law and a dream for a better life. It is surely not an easy job, but we as law enforcement are doing and will do our utmost to uphold the IPR protection as the most significant priority. Hundreds and thousands of police officers at central, provincial, and local levels have been mobilized to the unprecedented efforts against IPR crimes. We are engaged in a national battle against IP crimes, which can be seen in the Operation Sword of 2011, National Joint Campaign of 2012, and Operation Anti-Counterfeiting of 2013. So notably, during the Operation Cloud last year, which was focusing on the counterfeiting medicine activities of the internet, over 300 million of fake medicines was seized, and 1,300 criminals arrested. It was the first ever big seizure of fake medicines in China. However, we are not alone in this endeavor. We take it essential to work closely with our partners, including the international law enforcement colleagues, and most importantly, the outstanding representatives of the pharmaceutical industries, like all of you present today. We are stronger when we work together. In year 2012, the MPS conducted joint operation named Plan Blue with US ICE against counterfeiting luxury bags and arrested over 30 suspects and seized over 27,000 luxury brand bags. In 2013, the above two agencies conducted another successful joint operation against smuggling, counterfeiting pharmacies and illegal stimulant substance, and 8 suspects has been arrested so far. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to move forward, we will undoubtedly encounter differences and difficulties, both at home and abroad. But as long as we keep learning from one another, supporting each other, and standing firmly together, I believe there is good reason for confidence in where our efforts will lead us from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now take a short break. We will be back in this room in about 15 minutes for lunch. We want to thank all the participants this morning, the panels. Thank you, officials from China. If you would like, Jalali Hartman is displaying his robot in the break room, as well as the IPR Center has some examples of fakes and counterfeits. So with that, again, we'll be back in this room in about 15 minutes. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch, and I hope you all enjoyed the morning program. The afternoon is just equally exciting, and we're starting off with a wonderful speaker. And for the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, I'd like to welcome Jack Howard, Senior Vice President for Congressional and Public Affairs with the U.S. Chamber, to come up and introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I, too, I want to thank everybody for attending the Global Intellectual Property Center's second annual Intellectual Property Champions Conference. Try saying that 5 times real fast. The protection of intellectual property rights is a priority for the U.S. Chamber, obviously. And GIPC helps lead a worldwide effort to champion intellectual property and property rights as vital to creating jobs, saving lives, advancing global economic growth, and generating breakthrough solutions to global challenges. A key tactic in this broader strategy is fostering relationships with elected officials who can serve as strong voices for IP in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And today, we're fortunate enough to have one of the new generation of representatives join us during a congressional recess, no less, so we are particularly grateful for him making the effort to come up today, from the great state of Georgia. Representative Doug Collins was elected to the House of Representatives from Georgia's 9th District in 2012 and has quickly become a leading voice for intellectual property in the 113th Congress. Prior to his election, Representative Collins served as senior pastor at Chicopee Baptist Church, a Georgia state representative, and as a chaplain in the Air Force Reserve. In 2008, he served a combat tour stationed at Balad Air Force Base in Iraq, and before that he earned a degree in political science and criminal justice from North Georgia College and State University, a master's degree in divinity from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and a JD from John Marshall Law School in Atlanta, all while serving as a Georgia state rep. In the 113th Congress, Representative Collins serves on the House Judiciary, Oversight, and Government Reform and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, the Chamber appreciates your strong support of intellectual property rights, and we look forward to your comments today. Please welcome Representative Doug Collins.
Well, good afternoon. Okay, this is a live audience. Okay, I am from Georgia, a little slow maybe at times, but we do like some feedback here as we get started. I know lunch is in. No one asked to speak right after lunch typically, but there's a coffee pot on your table. That's the smaller cup. Fill it full. Now, it is good to be here with you today, and I enjoyed flying up. And the issue that I have, we're talking about our recess. I'm back home in what we call the district work period, and most of the world calls it recess. I'm still, if you come with me to the Georgia's 9th Congressional District and follow me around 20 counties, I'm still looking for the playground and the swing sets because I've yet to have recess in over 18 months. And in looking so, it's really, the reason is because I spend time talking to the constituents in our district. I spend time going to businesses. I talk to the businesses and sit down and see what their issues are, and then I also spend time talking to really what I consider the next generation, and for those of us in this room, really what is the foundation of what you're building here in intellectual property. And I just appreciate the Chamber for putting this on, and the Global Center here for putting these issues forward. Because when you have these issues that we're talking about here, they're not just affecting the members at these tables, they're affecting the folks who will sit at these tables in years to come. And I think sometimes this is what happens in Congress and in our other legislative bodies. We lose sight of our constituents. We believe many times our constituents are the very ones we're looking at right at this moment. And in reality, our constituents are folks who may not even understand what we are saying, but we have to look long term. In an ever-changing environment, that's very difficult. I also am pleased, and I just want to point out with David Lowry, who you heard earlier, and his lovely wife here, and going down in the Athens community. Athens and Georgia have a rich music heritage and tradition, and I'm so happy to have David as a part of our district and the 9th District of Georgia and part of Athens. And congratulations, thank you for what you do and for what you meant to this meeting here today, and it's good to have you here with this. Today is a celebration of champions. It's a celebration of innovation and technology. It's a celebration of the American spirit of challenge. It's the American spirit of innovation and success. We're here to celebrate really what I believe is the fundamental change in our society from going and from taking what is tangible product and also taking the thought process that goes into that and laying the foundation for achievement in the future. You know, the common thread of intellectual property, and I want to spend some time here, and we don't think about this a lot, because the very term intellectual property implies a thought. It implies the very idea of thinking of something, of creating something with a space that is simply between the ears. Another way to put this is a dream. Now, many times we get bogged down in the business aspect of intellectual property and what we do and our representatives of the companies we have. But at the very heart of intellectual property is a thought or a dream or an idea that is shared, that comes from maybe small, that is pursued into something big, that sometimes changes the world, other times it just changes the individual. That's still a pretty cool thing to be about. When you look at intellectual property, when you think about the aspect that it pays, there is something that is thrown around a lot today, and that is the Constitution. It's thrown around in saying many of our areas, we need to get back to our founders' intent. We need to talk about the Constitution and our constitutional role of government. Well, intellectual property was so thought of that it was actually enshrined in that document. And if this is what we're to be about, then shouldn't we not be about what the founders knew over 200 years ago, and that the thought and the genius and the spark or the song or the creative aspect that is within each and every one of us, that is the engine that drives our economy and has drove us in America and across the world to be leaders in technology and in ideas and hopes and in dreams. You see, I grew up in North Georgia. My district is probably a very unique district to a lot of folks. I go from very urban North Atlanta, suburban North Atlanta, to very rural southern Appalachia. The Appalachian Trail starts in my district. Now, for any of those who want to walk that district, God bless you. I'll tell you where to start, and I'll wave as you go by. For me, if I was going to walk the Appalachian Trail, I think I'd have to come up with somebody else I could ride with up that. But it is a great place. But it's one of those places in nature where it's also a very independent spirit. It's an independent spirit where if you live in the mountains and you're 30 miles away from the nearest store or hardware store, you learn to innovate. You learn to do things sort of on the fly. I had a father-in-law who is now deceased. He died about 3 years ago. And my lovely bride and I, when I first got to know Jimmy was one of those people, have you ever known these folks who could do anything with nothing, but have everything and do nothing with it? That's Jimmy. Jimmy could have a brand new product and he would throw it away to go try and put something together with scrap parts and typically come up with something pretty cool. But yet he never got past 6th grade. But Jimmy had an innovative spirit. He had an intellectual property that he used that is really what you're celebrating here today. And it may come in different forms. It may come in pharmaceuticals. It may come from sports. It may come from music. It may come from different ideas in motion pictures and other things. But it is that very kind of spark that I saw in my father-in-law that it said, you know, it takes an idea. It takes a dream. It takes thinking sometimes outside the box to create the world that not only we want to live in, but for others who are going after us to live in. That's a pretty cool thought. I'm a son of a state trooper. Now, that sounds pretty cool until you actually live it. I always thought it was pretty cool. I had, you'd drive up and Dad would come get me in high school. Dad would pull up to the front door of the high school in the state patrol car. And of course, everybody back in the early 80s, yes, I'm dating myself. The early 80s, I get in the car, they say, there's a state trooper out front. What'd you do wrong? I said, it's my dad. No, you're not. You got caught. And of course, Dad would come out and he'd say, all right, time to get in. He'd open the back door and put me in the back seat. Thanks, Dad. But one of the things and I tell you that to just sort of give a little bit of background on myself, because many times today, and I love what my introduction, and I thank you for that, where it talks about innovating with legislators and combining with business and fostering relationships, because so many times we in the Congress come before you and we'll tell you our speech and we'll sit here and we'll go through it and we'll try to keep you away, and we never connect on the reality of who we are and the very folks that we represent and you represent. Why is this important to me? Why is intellectual property something that I have focused so much on in my short time in Congress? Is because as a child growing up, my dad was gone a lot doing his job as a state trooper, which left me at home to read and to think and to watch TV. And I was born in the late 60s and the early 70s. What was huge, and this is sort of maybe even a thought, what was big during that time? What was really dominating a lot of the conversation in America that was really innovative in that time frame? Do anybody remember? Anybody ever want to go to the moon? I did. Because I remember the picture that they went to the moon and they stepped foot on the moon, and I remember the moon shots later, and I remember the made-for-TV movies that basically said you can stow away to the moon. It was a classic, one of those made-for-TV kind of things, but for me it was real. And as a young man growing up, I could go outside and I would look up at that moon and I would begin to think about the possibilities for my life. And to me, you can never separate intellectual property. You can never separate the thought, the dream, the hope, the process that we go through from the very thought of a dream. And that is, to me, what always needs to be protected. My mom always said, Doug will always be fine if he can find a phone and somebody to talk to. She never really thought I would end up where I'm at now. But you see something, why is this important to a congressman from North Georgia? It's because I make my living with intellectual property. Now, that is the perfect opportunity for many of you to open up and say, yes, he's in Congress, there's not much intellectual property going on up there. And that may be true, but that is the way I think. I've been a pastor. I'm still a chaplain in the Air Force. I've started a small business. I'm a lawyer. I've been in legislative office now on the state level and the federal level. I don't, at the end of the day, am able to pick up a box or to pick up a widget or to pick up a pill or pick up something and say, here's my production for the day. The only thing that I have that is valuable, the only thing that I can give is what I think and what I produce and what I can convince of others. And that is the basis of intellectual property. That is the basis of why you are here. Although you have many forms of how you talk about it, the basis of intellectual property is that ideas matter, that dreams matter, because they're the basis of innovation, they're the basis of jobs, they're the basics of the next generation of economies that we see. And I believe that ideas matter and they're worthy of protection just as any other stick in those bundle of property rights for the attorneys in the room. Remember that lecture? You have a bundle of sticks in your property. Intellectual property, your thoughts are just as powerful as something that you own or walk on or build. And until we get back into that understanding, then that is what is missing many times from our intellectual property discussions. I enjoy to read. And I enjoy reading, and there's a book out right now for those in Washington. It's called Lincoln Boys. It's by Joshua Zeitz. I encourage you to read it. John Hay, many of you know the Hay Adams Hotel, and John Hay was one of Abraham Lincoln's personal secretaries. And he was actually a poet. And he wrote this, and just a few weeks ago I was thinking about what intellectual property means and how do you sum up the thought that is within inside us. And this is what John Hay said. He said that poetry was one of the most noblest faculties of our nature, and it should be cultivated to its fullest extent. The true poet will cultivate the gift. One who is so highly gifted can no more keep silent and withhold from pouring out a flood of song than the songster of the grove refrain from warbling their notes of praise or the river refusing to flow. If you're a songwriter, if you're a creator of widgets or objects, if you're a thought who puts their work on canvas or puts their work into a film or puts their work into TV, or no matter what it may be, from healthcare to medicine or anywhere else that you may want to look, it all starts with that creative spark. And John Hay, over 150 years ago, actually captured that essence. Sometimes we think about it in terms of business. I want you, at least for a moment during this lunch, to take it out of the business realm and begin to put intellectual property into something that you own, that comes out of you, that is valuable. Because when we do that, this event symbolizes and crystallizes that intellectual property matters. That intellectual property is something that should not be taken lightly. It should not be explained away. It should be celebrated. And that is what this luncheon is doing today. This is what this whole day is about. Is celebrating the opportunities and the property that comes from within. Now, however, I need to talk about something. And it's concerning because we see this on Capitol Hill. Our society today is losing sight of this thought that dreams and ideas and thoughts matter. You only have to look to this week in the Supreme Court, where a work is being challenged and a case is there that really, for me, challenges our sense of fairness that was on display with a case this week involving broadcasting. You see, the protecting of copyrighted works was on issue with those who want to resell without consent from the creator. That, to me, is disturbing. And it should be disturbing to every one of you in this room, no matter where you come from. Because if it is okay to take what I produce with my mind or I produce with my work or my labor and to take that and then to be able to resell it without my consent and without compensation, that should affect everyone in this room, but it's not isolated. There's a growing movement in this country to believe that if it's out there, everybody should be able to take part in it. It's out there, everybody should be able to profit, because if you thought of it and I can do it, I should be able to take it. And that is wrong. Let me be clear. I believe that strong IP protections, intellectual property protections, are not a hindrance to innovation, but they're the very stimulus to the creative process. They give reason to go out there and dream the next dream, to write the next song, to develop the next medication, to develop the next widget or assembly line part or whatever it may be. It is the very protections that the intellectual property rights have that cause you to want to be a part of the innovative process, not to take away from it. I thought about this and said that was best summed up by an old preaching professor I had one time. He said this. He said, guys, you can go graze where you want to, but in the end, you need to give your own milk. Pretty smart thought. Graze wherever you want to. Go learn, go read, go dream, go. But in the end, give your own milk. Don't take from somebody else. And that's why intellectual property rights are so valuable. To realize our potential and continued leadership and innovation, we cannot allow 20th century law to determine a 21st century economy. We've got to encourage business and not government. We've got to be able to get into the idea that these values are protected. And that's how we do that in Congress. Now, you say, why is that important? You've heard a lot about it today, but just a couple of quick facts. The nationwide impact of those businesses and industries dominated through intellectual property or have a basis in intellectual property. Listen to these numbers. They provide 55.7 million jobs, 46% of all private employment, 35% of the U.S. gross domestic product, 3/4 of the nation's exports. The intellectual property engine of the United States is valued at over $5 trillion. Now, even in Washington, D.C., $5 trillion is still real money. That's a huge amount that comes from a dream. It comes from an idea. The problem is, and you've talked about this morning, is that we lose well over $250 billion to counterfeit, to global piracy, and to things that infringe on the very copyrights and protections we have. In fact, it is one of our greatest sources of drain in our economy. Instead of stimulus, let's close the loopholes. Instead of stimulus that we pour out money, let's begin to give businesses and innovation the protection they need so that they can go out and compete in the marketplace and share those ideas across the world. That is what intellectual property should be about. You see, also, I believe the U.S. is the premier incubator for the world's technology. And intellectual property, we must lead in its protection and not allow the world to take over and decide what that means. You see, here our founders decided that intellectual property was worth protecting in the Constitution, that there should be limits on what you have and how you're able to use what you think of and what you dream. But around the world, they don't have that similar thought. In fact, there's a movement around the world to weaken intellectual property rights and to weaken the protections that are around the creator. And instead of creating and instead of incentivizing the creator, they're actually tearing that down. And the U.S. cannot take a back step in this. We have to maintain our leadership role because the world is looking to what we do. I was talking recently to some folks in Europe, and they were over here, and they were saying, this is what they told me. They said, Congressman, we want to see what's happening in the United States because we want to see what your copyright, what your patent law, what you're going to be doing, because then we can see where you're going, because many of us in these nations need help developing our laws, and when we lead, then we can have others that will follow, and all are protected, and our generations of economy will grow. But if we sit back and we do not stand up for the dream and the thought and the process, then frankly, we've lost it. You see, I believe that the Innovation Act passed by the House, and one of the things we do well is talk in Congress about doing things for our children and grandchildren. Good IP policy is one of those things. But I want to tell you something. We in the House have passed the Innovation Act. The Senate needs to take up the Innovation Act and soon either pass the House version, pass their own version, and get us to a conference committee. As soon as we do, at that point, we would welcome action to ensure America's innovators of this generation and the next that good, strong markets aren't just a game of chance. They're driven by individuals confident that their work will be sustained and protected. You see, the Innovation Act that came out of the House, in which I had a large part in trying to help shepherd through, is something that struck a balance. And some of you may have liked some of it, some of you may have not liked part of it, but that is the way legislation is to be formed. Not everybody gets what they want, but we're moving the ball forward to protect the very innovators and creative rights that I believe this audience needs to be about. Now, the question is, will we continue to live off 20th century laws in a 21st century society? The Innovation Act takes a step forward in doing so. But also I'm going to say you, sometimes us in this town, we need to take a step back. And as my staff often tells me, I need to speak slowly. For some, they have said I'm the fastest talking Southerner they've ever heard. That's okay. But I need, in our society, we need to take a step back. And one of the things we fought for was against an expansion of the covered business methods patent, because it had not had a chance under the last Act to really begin to work. And all we were saying was, let's make that happen. That's a part of the Innovation Act that was taken out that says, let's let some things work so that we can get an understanding of where we're going. It's never a bad thing to take a deep breath. It's never a bad thing to do good policy and to look at the results. And that's one of the things we're going to continue. Now, I also sponsored a bill called the Songwriter Equity Act, and it was dealing with fairness and discussion for songwriters. Really, you don't have to know a lot about the bill except to say this. And for those in this room, you'll probably understand there are 3 ways that people get paid: 2 in which the government are involved and 1 in which the government's not. Let's take a quick guess at which one is fairest. It's not the one with the government involved. And we're just simply having a discussion to say there needs to be fairness when it comes to our creators in our song and our entertainment industries. You see, in Georgia 9, we may be a mountain district, but for the longest time, our district court in North Georgia was one of the heaviest patent litigated courts in the country. Anybody like to take a guess at why? It wasn't music, although we have 50,000 songwriters in Georgia. It wasn't some other things. It was chicken. Just like you had for lunch. Thank you for honoring Georgia's 9th Congressional District, the poultry capital of the world, for lunch today. It was the processing and all those little inventions from taking feathers off to cutting chicken. All of those had somebody with an idea, and a lot of them came from backwoods and garages in my congressional district where people thought there's got to be a better way. Is that not the music to the ears of an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist or anybody else? I have an idea that may be a little better. That's what it has. And in Georgia's 9th Congressional District, poultry led the way in patents and in copyright. And there was a lot of litigation, but it all came from ideas, many of which came from simple folks saying there must be a better way. You know, on the plane up this morning, I was doing what I really love to do and was thinking about this message, and I was listening to my music on my phone today, I guess it was. I listened to a lot of things. But this morning, a song from Green Day, small band, came on. And it was a song that many have heard at retirement. And I've heard it played at different things. The title's a little deceptive. It's called Good Riddance. But what it basically says is this. It says, after everything in life, everything that goes on, that at the end of the time, in the end, everything's unpredictable. And the end is right. I hope you've enjoyed the time of your life. And when it ended right there, I thought to myself, you know, for a group of innovators, for a group of industries in this room that literally have the ability to change the world, shouldn't we protect that? Shouldn't that be something that we have that says that 20th century laws may not be all right for a 21st century economy in dealing with the thoughts and dreams? And if it means protecting the thoughts and dreams of the folks of the 9th District of Georgia who maybe had a better way to pluck a chicken, or maybe songwriters across the country who just want to earn a living, to pharmaceutical companies in our state that do new biologics, to those who just make designs and t-shirts or whatever else you want to call it. Isn't it about having the time of your life? Isn't it about protecting the dream of even a kid from North Georgia who looked at the moon and said, you know, one of these days, I may chase my own dream. That's what protection of intellectual property is about. And that's what I'm going to continue to do in the United States Congress, to take the dreamers and say, we're going to protect your dream so that instead of restricting ideas, we can create ideas. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. That was amazing. We really appreciate you being here. For the final panel today, we would like to welcome David Hirschman back up to the stage to serve as a moderator and introduce our panel for a discussion on the importance and effectiveness of public-private cooperation on enforcement efforts. So with that, we'll ask the panelists to come to the stage.
thank you, everybody, and thanks. I think we've had an extraordinary morning and lunch, a great luncheon speaker, but I think we truly have saved the best for last with some bias, and in part because we had a chance to discuss some of this early on. We're going to do this a little differently from the sessions so far today, because all three of our presenters wanted to use this not just to discuss their particular point of view, but also to get input from the audience and participate and have more of a discussion. So what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about what's working on the enforcement side. And in particular, we're going to start with the NFL because the public-private partnership is so critical to success in IP enforcement. Anastasia Danius is the Senior VP and Chief Legal Officer of the NFL. She was promoted last year. She's been with the NFL for a few years, handling the IP portfolio. Now she handles the barter litigation portfolio and has been a great partner to the Global Intellectual Property Center and on a whole range of issues, particularly working on China, and really has shown, I think, the rest of the business community how civil enforcement combined with good partners on the criminal enforcement side can produce measurable points on the board results on IP enforcement. Well, next year from Marian Fogel, who is at the Department of Justice, has served 2 tours of duty at the White House, in 2 White Houses, most recently at the Domestic Policy Council, and now works for the Deputy U.S. Attorney General. Among her portfolio is the Attorney General's IPR Task Force, and it's an assignment she took on last year. And as the role that the DOJ has played, in particular in ensuring that for the worst of the worst, the appropriate criminal enforcement is made, has been truly exemplary, and the voice of the Department of Justice in support of intellectual property in the courts is seen this week with the Solicitor General's participation in the area case. The DOJ is a key partner in helping move the needle forward. And Lev Kubiak, who everybody knows, runs the IPR Center, which is, I always get the number of agencies wrong that form the IPR Center, and it's at least 21 and 3 or 4 foreign governments. In part because it keeps growing, because Lev is a unabashed and successful recruiter. And we were talking about how even countries that might have been reluctant to participate and collaborate and work with the United States on IPR enforcement a few years ago have really joined the fold. What I think is remarkable is what started out as a Operation in Our Sights effort to go after some of the worst websites has turned into really a broad international collaboration to really look not just at the websites and the piece that Lev and the IPR Center team and all the enforcement actions that they brought, but really to look more broadly at how you go after the criminals behind the sites, and it produced some tremendous results. So we'll talk a little bit first, and in that order maybe, about what is working, what you see as success stories, and then maybe we can have a conversation about how to be even more effective in the year ahead. And let's start with you, Anastasia.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Delighted to be here with this panel today. I'm sorry, is that better? For many reasons, mostly because the successes that we at the NFL have when it comes to enforcement of our intellectual property would not be possible without the collaboration of the IPR Center and Department of Justice. And I think one of the main themes that I'm going to be talking about today is, obviously that we're all going to be talking about, is how that collaboration has really yielded incredible results over the past number of years. I've been at the NFL for about 14 years now. When I started in the intellectual property group, our biggest IP issues were guys selling counterfeit T-shirts out of a duffel bag outside of a stadium. Gone are those days when this was a localized, smaller problem that was really focused on, where we focused on local screen printers who were literally getting guys, kids, to go sell these things out of a stadium. The growth of the internet has just created an explosion in terms of ways that counterfeiters are becoming more global and are getting the products to consumers in just a number of different ways. They're getting more sophisticated, their products are getting better, and they are no longer selling products that look like counterfeits. They're selling products that are, in a lot of ways, competitive with the merchandise that our licensees spend tons of resources in research and development. And I know that's not unique to the NFL brand. I'm sure that's true of all brand owners who are here, which is why we have had to grow and adapt to be able to try to get ahead of some of these problems. So where does that bring us today? We have been working with federal law enforcement and closely with the IPR Center for close to a decade now, maybe a little less than that. And we have really found that we have just learned a tremendous amount in having the collaboration with law enforcement that we do today. We used to work and continue to work and have wonderful relationships at the local levels with police departments, at the state levels as well when we're dealing with some of the localized problems, but we have just been able to learn so much more about how to attack this problem on a more global level as part of the collaboration with federal law enforcement. We still our brand. We want to protect it in a number of ways, and what we do civilly in many ways is just as important. We try to get the word out to fans. We talk to them about why buying counterfeits is bad, why it hurts them, why it hurts the economy. And I think that is one of the things where we can do better. Because what we are seeing over and over again, at least in our industry, is that consumers know that they are buying counterfeits and they don't care. We looked at a couple recent surveys, one about a year ago, that showed that 68% of people would buy counterfeits because they don't see the harm there. We did a survey a little bit more recently, and 38% of consumers who bought counterfeits in the past would probably do so again, based on the knowledge they have now. And so I think one of the things that we need to do, and some of the presentations earlier today were just wonderful on this front, is educate fans as to the harms of buying counterfeits and supporting those criminal activities. And I think that's one area in particular where this collaboration has really just helped take it off the ground. We are still conducting our civil efforts. We are filing litigations and lawsuits against operators of sites that sell counterfeit merchandise and getting those sites seized and trying to go after the wallets of the people who are operating them. But like with any sales over the internet, it's a big game of whack-a-mole. And so this ability to be able to collaborate with sort of the power of law enforcement has really been able to help us get our program off the ground in a much more meaningful way.
I am here today to make sure you all know what I hope is very apparent, which is that the administration and the Department of Justice care very deeply about intellectual property rights enforcement protection. And I'm fortunate to work for an Attorney General who has made this a priority. As David mentioned, the Attorney General has started a task force that he actually led when he was the Deputy Attorney General in 2000 to ensure that we are as focused and coordinated with our many efforts at the department and with our partnerships with our U.S. governor partners outside of throughout the government and in the industry. So in that role, I have the good fortune to work with Director Kubiak, and we enjoy a strong working relationship, as he does with many of the components in the department, as well as the IP enforcement coordinator's office at the White House, Commerce, and many other government entities who have prioritized IP rights enforcement. I'm also here to make sure you know what, again, I hope you all know, but all too often it is surprising to people how many different divisions we have at the department that do focus and whom we do coordinate resources focusing on IP rights enforcement. Many of you do know that we have a very active and effective CSIPs, Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section within our criminal division, and Chris Merriam, the director of that division, is here today and leads a very strong team of over a dozen attorneys who focus almost exclusively on enforcing these crimes and overseeing the work of over 250 attorneys at U.S. attorneys' offices throughout the country who focus primarily on these issues. most people, some people know, hopefully most people, but that our civil division is also deeply interested in this. Lesser numbers know about our Office of Justice programs. That is our grant and research division at the Justice Department, which the Attorney General tasked with working with our law enforcement partners in the state and local areas. So since 2009, we've given over $15 million in grant money to help state and local partners build their infrastructure and develop better IP enforcement protections for their areas, which has seen great benefits. We've since that time seized $318 million in merchandise and currency. I say we, I'm a proud parent of the grantees. I should give all the credit to them. They've disrupted and dismantled over 600 illegal piracy and counterfeiting operations and have arrested more than 1,400 individuals. For one example, a great example is the Los Angeles Police Department, which in its first year of the grant program experienced 192% increase in intellectual property theft arrests, just 1 year. So, you know, we unfortunately don't have ample resources, but even in our time of scarce resources, the Attorney General wanted to prioritize the building of this infrastructure, which, you know, we're happy to see has benefited both in the arrests, but also in the public education campaign that we invest in, and a lot of the technical assistance that we provide to our grantees, which is a number that is harder to quantify, but one we also know is very effective. And the other reason I'm here today is to amplify a message that, again, I hope you know, but the importance of our partnership with industry. And without that, without our partnership with consumers, with business partners, we know we couldn't have made the gains that we have. We know that most of our, I don't know the exact number, many of our investigations start with leads from industry, and many of our prosecutions can only happen based on the support we're getting. We know that in the past there's been some hesitation to work with the department and share the crown jewels. You know, it's a cost-benefit analysis that I know that people have to go through, and we're proud to see that in recent years it seems that the calculation has weighed in favor of working with the department as we've made great strides to protect your secrets and understanding the sensitivities involved while still making the arrests and doing the investigations that need to be happening. So I'm very much hopeful today that I'll be hearing your feedback on what we are doing well. We love hearing that, but also what we can be doing better. If you have concerns, if you have processes that are not working, it's very important that we hear that at the department and share that with our leadership and with the members of the task force. It's again, a partnership that ensures that we can do our job and that we can help you protect the economy and best protect consumers. So we rely on that and hope that this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation.
Thank you, Miriam. I just want to echo Miriam's comments. The department, really the grants, I'll just start with that, because the grants have been such a phenomenal motivator and opportunity for federal law enforcement and industry to kind of follow up on these grants and to help state and local law enforcement connect with what the real threat is, which in the 3 years that I've been the director at the IPR Center and throughout my law enforcement career, I'm sure everyone in this room recognizes the true evolution that counterfeiting has gone through, and Anastasia talked about it. The guy selling t-shirts out of a duffel bag at the stadium to super sophisticated, and you can see a couple of examples out there in the display as you walk out of the room, products that are now compromising literally every brand around the world. If somebody makes it, I heard somebody say at a conference the other day, and I was really impressed with this, you either have a counterfeiting problem or you have a marketing problem. Because if they aren't counterfeiting you, then you haven't really made it yet. And I think that really, unfortunately, has become so true. But I will tell you, just in the 3 years that we've been here and working so closely with the Chamber, we've seen such a great transition from a law enforcement perspective. And I think the key piece of this panel, to me, is that the value of learning, the partnership that we have with industry, and I'm happy to see that, I know a large number of people that are in the room, and people have been at the IPR Center, and they've partnered with us and we've helped, and we have various levels of partnership, capability and interaction. And the NFL is one of our prime examples. We've really moved that program from a couple of small week operation in partnership with the NFL to now a really robust global initiative. This year we had Mexico join the operation with the NFL for the first time we've had a foreign government kind of join one of our national operations, and we are seizing immense amounts of counterfeit in the United States, high quality counterfeits, kind of exploring new areas and new tactics at the criminal organizations. And we heard it all this morning during the presentation. Each of those criminal organizations have really evolved their activity because there's so much money to be made from a criminal perspective in this space. And so getting back to the grants, the opportunity to kind of help use that money to share that message and to get local law enforcement and state law enforcement engaged. And if you read your local papers, you'll see that starting to happen. Ann Harkin, who's in the room here representing the National Crime Prevention Council, and I spoke at the International Chiefs of Police Association, and we'll be at the Sheriff's Association this year. And we are starting to get a real groundswell of interest. She did a study, her organization did a study that said the average American consumer doesn't see IP as a crime because none of their local elected officials and none of their local law enforcement officials at one point talked about it as a crime problem. And so they don't equate this counterfeiting with a crime problem. And so our job, Miriam and Lev's and all the agencies that are at the center, and as David said, the international partners as well, is to help raise the realization that it is a crime problem and that there are criminal organizations, and that, sure, the health and safety, the pharmaceutical keys have to be our major priority because they threaten people's lives now. The counterfeiting of products is so sophisticated that people can't tell the difference from the real from the fake anymore. And how we know that is because I'll bet most of the businesses in this room are inadvertently buying counterfeit in their own organizations, not knowing, buying counterfeit yourselves by shopping on the internet, not having that capability to discern the real from the fake anymore. And so we have to really connect, but I'm so encouraged sitting through today's events. Everybody in this room has evolved their game over the last 3 years, right? The level of conversation, the sophistication of what Marjorie and Libby are doing with the pharmaceutical outreach and groups there, it's just dramatically changed in the last 3 years. And so I'm really encouraged, even though the problem has grown so much more. I think we really are at a moment where we can change that activity. I spent yesterday afternoon with some of the contingent here from the Chinese embassy. Mr. Hu and I had a conversation, and I'll be traveling to China in 2 weeks. And we are beginning to figure out better ways to collaborate with our Chinese partners as well to try and start to address the problem from the purchasing that's going on in the United States and the production that's in China. And again, DOJ is doing some great work with the JLG, and CSIPs, the Computer Crimes and Intellectual Property section, does that here. So we have the advantage of working full-time at the center on IP. As we like to say, World IP Day is every day at the IPR Center. We don't need a special day to celebrate it. It is always going on there. And all the agencies there are engaged. What we've done with the NFL, we've now also done with the automotive industry. And that key partnership is kind of the key. So for any of you that may not know, we have this real problem with counterfeit automotive parts and counterfeit airline parts. Exploding airbags is the most audacious, I think, commodity that we're fighting with right now. But we're starting now to make more and more progress with the automotive industry by partnering with them and identifying what they know and the trends for the legitimate supply chain coming into the United States and the illicit supply chain, and then partnering to pursue those criminal organizations that are involved in that. Additionally, our latest challenge is a realization of a flood of counterfeit parts that are making their way into the United States military. And so we're seeing with the U.S. military partners at the IPR Center, we have them all located there as well, a real concerted effort of a realization of the problem and then struggling with how to correct that problem and how to address that problem. And the law enforcement agencies there and the non-law enforcement agencies there are very engaged. But lastly, I think just the partnership with the international partners. Europol has done a fantastic job of really helping us raise awareness throughout Europe of the concerns that we have in the United States. And we have seen a marked change in Europe over the last 3 or 4 years. We're now with federal and local law enforcement agencies coming to us very actively and saying, how do we get engaged? How do we do this more? And I think that provides an opportunity for everybody in the room to really tackle this problem in a new way and a more effective strategy.
I would just add and echo one more thing. I think one of the key things that we learned from working with law enforcement is, as I said, sort of our industry practice was there's one way to attack this problem. It's you go after the guys who are selling these T-shirts on the street. What we've learned is that it's a multifaceted problem that requires really a number of different sort of touch points. So you're no longer just dealing with the screen printers, you're dealing certainly with the production facilities, but you have supply chain security, you have different distribution platforms of getting the merchandise into the United States and to the consumers. You have the consumers as touch points themselves and trying to educate them on the fact that this is a very low risk, high yield criminal enterprise. And I think a lot of those learnings, us having an expertise in our business, in our products, in how they're made and how they're distributed, working with law enforcement has again, just really helped with a yield in terms of results that touch on each of those points, whether it's through consumer education, whether it's through working with some of the some of the supply chain issues, as well as some of the distribution in working with some of the express carrier unit and things like that we never would have been able to develop on our own, just as part of our brand.
Just to capitalize on that just for a second, I'll just give you a real example of what we've talked about. Is it's really been bi-directional learning in this particular space. When we started operation in our sites, with DOJ's involvement, CSIPs, we don't take down a domain name without great scrutiny by the Department of Justice to make sure that we're doing it properly, and we appreciate that completely. That partnership is invaluable. But we thought the first version of Inner Sites was hugely successful, and I think we took down 7 or 8 websites, right? And I think people in this room would kind of laugh about that at this point. But in the beginning, it wasn't a strong program. We knew the internet was a problem. From us that are kind of in the customs business, we see it as the front end of the international supply chain. Now with business to consumer, people are purchasing, and it's causing real-time manufacturing, we think, in foreign countries, and then shipment into the United States and customs or around the world, and customs services having to try and ferret out the good traffic from the bad and stop that. And over time, we've learned from companies, computer companies have taught us about internet, how the internet is built and how the criminals engage and how they market to individuals and how they process payments. And so we learned that, and that evolved our activity. We learned from the NFL that here's where their specific vulnerabilities were. And I think in turn, the NFL has learned from us as Operation Inner Sites has evolved. And now they're seizing many more websites and domain names than we could ever hope to do in our judicial process. But I think it's that kind of give and take and true partnership between industry and government that's critical to the success of us dealing with this. We're never going to understand the supply chain as well as the company does. We're never going to see the first version of that counterfeited product as quickly as the company does. And by having that robust engagement and that collaboration, it really enables us to trade that information back and forth so that industry can increase its defenses, and so law enforcement can focus its limited resources on those things that have the biggest impact. And it's kind of a constant evolution. I would say that today almost marks a new version for the IPR Center, because the companies have evolved so much that now we need to kind of take it to another level as ourselves.
Okay, I remember when we started working on this, the most common complaint we heard was, look, even when we hire our own investigators in industry, if we take it to law enforcement, whether at the state level, first of all, we're not sure who's in charge. And if we can figure out who's in charge, it kind of disappears into a black box. And so for those who think that this is just kind of an orchestrated, we sit on stage and praise each other thing, there really is a history there where this kind of partnership that exists today just didn't happen 8-10 years ago at any level, right? Now what I like about the spirit of this partnership is that working with Lev and Miriam, and and I know that the thought is always, well, what can we do better? Okay, this is good, but what do we do next? I do think dedicated resources has been one of the most important differences here within private sector, and the way the private sector has dedicated resources to the problem, both here at the Chamber and elsewhere, as well as the dedicated resource brought up by the PRIP Act and other efforts within the federal government. It helps when it's, as you put it well, when it's World IP Day every day for really smart people who understand how to go after this problem. And so, in that spirit, we at least would make a plug for additional resources for our partners on the government side. The complaint I hear today is not, I don't get help, but I wish they would help me even more, right? Which is, in part, because this is such a whack-a-mole exercise, right? If you focus just on going after the online challenge, and then you also have to look at the multiple ways that they come across our borders, both small packages and containers, and really do enough enforcement both as a deterrent, but also to really gain that understanding you need about the general enterprises. So I suppose you wouldn't argue with me about more resources, but it's probably better said from our perspective. But what what capabilities, or where would you like to take this program in terms of the ability of where do you think this could go in the future? What's the aspirations from both our government partners?
Do you want to start? Do you want me to?
Okay.
Okay. All right. I think one piece that we're very focused, and I heard a lot today on consumers, educating consumers. And we've talked about this, David, you and I briefly before. I think one thing we forget about, so we know in the federal government that we're not going to arrest or seize or indict or prosecute our way out of this problem, right? There's too much of this. There's too many opportunities. And so this really has to be a demand reduction, a really strong demand reduction strategy has to be employed. And I think we have an opportunity, as I said, because now that they're counterfeiting everything, there's real harm, there's real lessons, and there's real capability, and there's real international, sophisticated international criminal organizations involved in the trafficking of this. And not solely, as someone mentioned this morning, not solely involved in this, but involved in this as kind of one of the tools or two of their tools in their criminal tool bag, right? So it's human trafficking and a whole bunch of other things kind of wrapped into one. But I think what we forget sometimes is that the consumers we want to educate are also the employees that we employ, right? And those that are not employees for a legitimate business in this room are probably crooks. No, I don't mean it that way, but they can be, right? People who are not employed by legitimate businesses are almost by definition either unfortunately out of work or involved in some sort of illicit activity that brings them into the space. So I think if we educate employees, right? I think if companies looked internally, and we're starting this within the department and within our departments, because we've realized that unfortunately we've purchased some counterfeit goods. Pretty embarrassing story. Part of our organization runs enforcement and removal operations. They run, detention facilities, and they purchased counterfeit chargers for ankle bracelets. That's a real law enforcement problem, right? If the thing's not charged up, we're going to have an issue. And they did it because they were able to purchase under a certain purchase limit and shop online, which is how a lot of, I think, businesses and government entities for small purchases are making those small purchases. And when you purchase on, this is the cheapest thing, and it's on the internet, a lot of times you're going to find that to be the counterfeit product, counterfeit version of whatever it is you're looking for. And so we started a procurement effort, education effort within the Department of Homeland Security, and are now educating the procurement folks to the vulnerability of counterfeit. And we've started educating our employees to make sure that everybody knows, hey, you can't engage in this. And I think if all of the companies in the United States did something similarly internally on that education piece, and people equated their job with not being involved in counterfeiting or engaging in trafficking, that activity, that would have a more meaningful impact than necessarily some of the consumer leveraging that we're doing. So I think that's one thing that we have to do. I think another thing that we have to do is we really have to get industry together a little bit more. There are still stovepipes, and there's real reasons for that. Business, you want to maintain your trade secrets or your business strategy or your successes. But even now with the evolution, I see stovepipes around certain types of commodities. So we have the luxury goods folks not necessarily talking to the express consignment folks, and they share the problem, right? The express consignment folks, not wittingly, unfortunately, are oftentimes the conveyor of the illegal product into the United States that hurts the luxury goods folks. And so what we try to do at the center is bridge those industry gaps to make sure that people know who to talk to amongst each other. And I think that's been a big development for us. And I think those are two areas where candidly right now we could make a lot of progress over the next year or two.
Agreed. And to add to those points, those good points, on the public education campaign, employees are certainly a prime audience. What I have done in my office, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to show you the slides here today, but for an event we had about a year and a half ago, we used some of the pictures we found from some busts to show people what it is they're buying, because it's so appealing to buy cheaper medicine. It's a huge cost, and people have, economic challenges, and it just makes sense to people at the time. But when they see the greasy fingers, the lack of safeguards in what is making that, and the cement powder that is actually going into these batches, and worst case scenario for life-saving treatments where their life is at risk, when people realize it's not saving a few dollars, it's actually personal harm to them, their family, their communities, when they understand, their safeguards in their car, their airbags, might not protect them. And so, buying that internet airbag all of a sudden can seem like less of a smart idea when you realize it's not actually going to protect your life, and it could actually harm you in a lot of these cases where shrapnel have been found to come, metal parts have come out of these counterfeit airbags. So I think one thing we've been thinking about and talking about the department is how to spread the word that it's a consumer harm, it's an economic harm. I think you do a great job at the center of building those visuals, and that's something that we've been trying to take a lesson on in the department as well. And anyone who comes to my office is subjected to these images, but we also have it posted on websites, and part of a public education campaign with our partner Ann, who's here today, and others. That it's key and much more work to do. A subset also of industry, I think, is another prime audience for us. I think we've made huge strides, as David said, in the industry, private sector writ large. I think there's other particular areas where we could do better. For instance, those coming to market, where their focus is so heavily on getting their business, their baby, their dream, their product to market, that they're not thinking about the protections or lack thereof along the way that could compromise their whole operation. These significant costs to safeguard their computers and educate their employees looks like a cost they can't afford until their secret ends up gone and they have nothing to come to market with. So I think, in the academic community, the areas around the country where these startups are really hot topic, and business model, that we could probably do more work there, educating about the proactive investment and how it's really in their best interest. And finally, I think an effort where we've started to see some big gains, but could further develop is in the public-private partnership of the government spurring on of private industry development. So, for instance, with the Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies, where the IP enforcement coordinator did a great job of bringing together the people with the equities to come up with voluntary measures to root out this problem. I think we've seen that happen in a few areas, and there's probably a lot more where, you know, we're happy to provide the fora to trigger the conversation and to facilitate industry deciding amongst itself what the best outcome should be, and how to regulate their economy in the way that makes sense, but also protecting themselves. So 3 areas where we can do more.
Good, let's open it up. If you have a question, raise your hand. We got one here, one back there. Somebody will bring you a mic. The only thing we ask is, in addition to asking a question, just identify yourself for the panelists. And we'll start right up here and then go back there.
Hi, thank you very much. My name's Kathleen Combs from Canon USA. And I'm wondering if the IPR Coordination Center has thought about coordinating with search engines for some kind of certification, trusted site source, things of that nature.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm glad that I get to punt this a little bit, so please, I'm not avoiding the question. Miriam mentioned the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator's Office, and they still continue under Alex Nigelo's guidance, but when the IPEC was there previously, they really started this conversation, I think, and drove it, and we have seen some very positive forward-leaning steps, and I won't mention specific companies, but we are in a much different place today than we were a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I would say, with collaboration with search engines, with discussions with search engines, and with some of these online marketplaces and credit card companies. The IACC, International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, is doing a great job in that space as well. And finally, companies like internet payment provider companies or money service business remitters. Not to say that we're at the solution point yet, we really aren't. We're a long way from that. I think it's such a big problem, and the things that make the internet so wonderful and so strong for us as consumers and legitimate businesses also make it pretty wonderful and strong for the criminal element. And so chasing it more effectively, I think, is more difficult. But it's a bit preliminary at this point, but I think my sense right now is that we're really on the beginning of a very positive trend with those entities. We wouldn't be necessarily the entity to create that safe space idea. What our strategy is, and this is very Pollyanna-ish, is we want to drive counterfeiters off of internet registries if we can, right? So if we could create a safe space in .com just by putting people out of jail, I tell my European friends this all the time, I'm trying to chase them all to Europe, and then you can deal with them from there when they're .eu or .ru or somewhere else. But that is why the partnership with our European partners is, because once you step out, that's the other challenge with policing, is that once you step off, the continental United States, our ability to really chase that is much more difficult. It's not impossible, but it becomes much more difficult for us. And the ability for these internet businesses to exist, almost in the ether, with very little, only in one host country, if you will, and to send all the products from there, demands international partnership and collaboration. So even if we were super effective, we wouldn't be able to wall off the United States from these illegal marketplaces, right, or where this is activity or this kind of consumer fraud. So I think it's a broader strategy. I'm hopeful. I don't know, Miriam, if you have a different, or Anastasia, I know you.
That's one of our biggest issues, right? So the counterfeit sites that are popping up ahead of the legitimate sites, whether it's an NFL site, one of our retailers, or one of the clubs, that's a real problem. We had for years sort of done a lot of hand-wringing, thinking like, God, we can't wait till somebody takes care of this for us, whether it's through legislation or figuring out a safe space in some way through a coordination center. And then we just reached out, and again, and we started developing relationships at Google, at Yahoo, at Amazon, many times through the help of the IPR Center with their contacts. And we found that we actually made great strides. Look, it's not the silver bullet that we want, that all of the counterfeits would be filtered out before they even pop up, but we are finding successes in developing relationships with some of these companies who, look, they certainly don't want the legislation that's going to put sort of the liability on them for having this stuff out there. But I think a lot of the search engines, a lot of the online marketplaces are sophisticated enough to see that they want to be on the right side of this stuff. And I think if you start talking with them and developing those relationships and go sit down and meet with them, you might be able to find some common ground that doesn't make everybody happy. It makes everybody a little bit unhappy, but starts to move the ball along.
Yeah. Back there.
Susan Finston Consulting. A lot of this is very familiar. In the late 90s, when I was still at the State Department, I was in the Intellectual Property and Enforcement Office, and was working on these issues before actually, at the time when the IP Center was first coming about. So it's great to hear about how it's expanded and grown. One of the things that was very disturbing to learn was that the first World Trade Center bombing, this was before 9/11, was funded in part by the sale of counterfeit trademarked T-shirts and things, sometimes on the streets of New York, very near to the World Trade Center, in fact. And of course, they weren't saying, oh, we're raising this so that we can carry out an organized criminal activity or terrorism. But a lot of the time, for example, counterfeit cigarettes are frequently used as a good moneymaker by organized crime, and not necessarily terrorists, but organized criminal enterprises. And I think also that consumers don't realize that when they are buying gray market or black market goods, they are contributing to the growth of, at a minimum, organized crime, and possibly even supporting, unwittingly, terrorist activities. And is this an area that any of you are active in to try to increase the awareness that this is not a victimless crime, and that in fact we may end up being the victims of the crime itself, and it isn't just a question of if the goods are safe or not safe, but actively what you are supporting by what you are willing to pay for, or what you think you're getting a bargain and paying less for?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. The State Department entity that you used to work for is the partner at the IPR Center that represents the Department of State there. So they too are a fantastic partner, and I'll just throw a quick pitch out to Jean Bonilla and her crew. They are really the impetus for us, and INL, which provides a lot of funding for us to do our training and our travel around the world, both Department of Justice, industry, and the partner agencies at the center. Bill Ross, who's our outreach and training unit chief sitting in the back of the room, his unit last year alone, I think, spoke to 21,000 people at 347 events, if I didn't get that right. That's more than one event a day, right? Or just almost one event a day. My math apparently is not very good. And that's part of our message at every one of those. What is really confounding to me is that it doesn't seem to connect, that message. It's really a struggle. My favorite story right now is our office out of New York City with Customs and Border Protection, another great partner at the center, seized 500 counterfeit phones coming into the United States. We ended up doing that investigation in partnership with the Nassau County District Attorney's Office, because initially it was perceived to be a small case. And the defendant, 18 months later, pled guilty and forfeited $46.5 million in criminal proceeds from the sale of counterfeit phones and phone components. So first of all, think about how many Americans have counterfeit phones that they don't know about at this point. Number two, think of the amount of money that was going, and that money is, a large part of that's going offshore for the purchase of those counterfeit products overseas. And so what we are doing is trying to chase the money much harder, but it's a struggle, and I ask a lot of the people in the audiences for expertise on this, because we have trouble connecting with things like pharmaceuticals that'll kill you and airbags that will kill you, and trying to get the American public to understand just that message. When you get down into simply, and I hate to put it this way, simply funding criminal activity through your purchase, for some reason the message seems to get even harder to convince people. I think good law-abiding people get the message, but across the general world, we're really struggling with that message. It's one of the reasons why we partnered with the Motion Picture Association of America to bring back a anti-piracy warning label on the front end of movies. Netflix, if you've rented Netflix, you've seen it, is because I think we need to generally raise that awareness all the way across the board. But if there's a really smart marketing person out there that can figure out how to help us get that message, we'd love the help. It's industry partnership. We're ready to get the activity in.
Just to echo that, he says it with a smile, but it's actually quite serious. I mean, that's been one of the most effective parts of our public education campaign is partnering with those who know much more about that than at least I do or others of us at the department do. You're right, and thank you, Susan. It's an important message, and it's on us to educate people. They have a lot of things that they need to be worried about in their day, and it makes sense that this is not first and foremost in their mind. And with this knowledge, it's our responsibility to share with people and make sure they're aware of it. So we're open for feedback on how to do a better job at that.
And we also in private industry have consumer bases, we have fan bases. We can be in a position to get the word out. I mean, especially the media companies and the NFL is a bit of a hybrid because we license merchandise, but we also have these media outlets, whether they're online through the networks or just up on the video boards at our stadiums. And so we're trying to figure out ways where we can get that message across and working with the IPR Center, but also think about whether or not you guys have logical ways to get that message across other than just on your websites. We have that sort of tension between sending the message, Susan, just like the one you raised about the link to terrorist activity, while going over a video board at a stadium. We don't want to scare our fans out of the stadium. But so we're trying to think of ways where we can educate fans as to where this money is going in a way that, coming from industry, makes sense. So I think that's on all of us to do better.
And I'll tell you, just to give you a real example, the NFL has been a huge proponent of that, Susan, to get to your point specifically. We partnered with the NFL, and Anastasia deserves the credit for giving us the venue of Super Bowl week. And we're going to recognize the team here with an award that pulled that off this year. And for government, we would never be able to on our own, I don't think, short of maybe having the president come out and speak specifically on this issue, to gather the kind of press corps that the NFL gathers during Super Bowl week. And so they've given us a platform in partnership with them where we can create that message and use that capability to drive the message much further. And so I think we are penetrating the market with a much more serious and complete message than we were years ago. But I think we're struggling with, we need to do it even more effectively. And so that's where we need additional help.
All our message testing, you saw that in some of the consumer awareness campaigns we saw earlier today, and I know from your own efforts. It's, all these arguments are true, but until you can relate it to that individual consumer, it's not about jobs, it's about my job. It's not about, health and threat and safety, it's about the threat to my health and safety or to my child's health and safety. In this era, we just have to make it much more personal and show how the action, and so when you can show how consumers are being duped and how easy it is to get fooled and what the consequences are, and that there's a real threat to that individual, you're much more likely to hit home.
And I think that's right. And I think it's a sad reality of, we have been telling, our fans for as long as I can remember that this hurts the economy. It's harder being in the sports industry or the luxury goods areas because it's not personal, as you said. It's not going to necessarily cause harm to the person buying it, other than they might get a product that they didn't want or that's not what they expected. When we started sending out the message of, we are getting story after story, and we are hearing more often than not that people's credit card information was defrauded, that they spent the money and didn't get the products, or that, and one that I hadn't been aware of before that we talked about, that a lot of these counterfeit sites have malware that gets onto your computer. Those are the type of things that motivate our consumers. And it'd be wonderful if the grander message that this hurts the American economy is what did it, but when people are struggling on their own and they want to get something that costs $20 for $10, it makes a difference, which is why David's point is the right one. Personalizing it really does have an impact.
Yeah, if you can show that it's not the deal they thought they were getting, quite the opposite, particularly when there's harm at stake. Anyway, we could go on and I know we still have some questions, but we want to make sure we leave enough time to do what we came here to do, which is to recognize the great work that is being done on the enforcement side. Particularly, I know we're going to highlight 5 enforcement cases that were particularly successful, that represent the full range of successful IP efforts, and that Lev and Miriam and the whole team and our government partners have brought about over the last year. And so let's proceed to that, and I'll turn it back to you, Brian. Thank you. Let's thank our panel real quick. Great. Thank you so very much. Excellent job, everybody. And we appreciate the conversation and the challenges that you are facing and the dedication you all have into addressing them. As David said, we are now going to come back to the fun part, which is presenting some awards. With that, we have 4 particular cases that we're going to highlight. The first case is Operation Team Player, which has been referenced today. Operation Team Player was a collaborative effort to target the sale of counterfeit sports products and tickets. Although the operation is year-round, initial results were announced in conjunction with the Super Bowl. Led by the National IPR Rights Coordination Center, this year the team achieved record-breaking results. More than 37 million in fake sports merchandise was seized. 70 people were arrested, 163 websites seized criminally, and 5,000 websites seized civilly by the NFL. The case is an excellent example of the results that can be achieved with the collaboration of industry and government. Offices from agencies around the country participated in Team Player, and being recognized for this operation today are the IPR Center, Homeland Security Investigations, Customs Border Protection, and the Mexican Customs Agency. Accepting the awards on behalf of all of these recipients are Special Agent Sophia Chacho of HSI New York, and HSI Special Agent William Engel of the IPR Center. So if we could have you come up, please. Yes. Thank you. Congratulations. Where did this picture? Oh, terrific. Good job. Thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you very much. The second case we're highlighting is the Micro PC Store case. Following a March 2011 seizure by CBP of 10 copies of counterfeit Microsoft software, the IPR Center opened an investigation and found that an individual sold counterfeit versions of Adobe, Microsoft, Intuit, and Rosetta Stone products worth a retail value of more than $750,000. The IPR Center coordinated with HSI Houston to execute search warrants, and the individual was eventually arrested and convicted. He was sentenced in January to 1 year in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, in order to pay more than $137,000 restitution to the companies. Being recognized for this operation are the IPR Center, CPB, and HSI Houston, and accepting the award on behalf of all the recipients is Senior Special Agent Michael Godfrey of HSI. Let's give another round of applause. The third case we're highlighting is regarding Baltimore military-grade circuits. An investigation conducted by HSI special agents in Baltimore, Maryland, Tampa, and Harrisburg, PA, identified a Chinese national as a co-conspirator in an overall scheme to traffic in counterfeit goods to include military-grade integrated circuits and defense goods into the United States. The individual and his co-conspirators created and operated several companies in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere to facilitate the conspiracy, and obtained other counterfeit goods, including computer software, DVDs, and sports jerseys, which he then distributed in the United States. In January, the individual pleaded guilty to conspiracy to traffic counterfeit goods, including military-grade circuits and other defense items. The man forfeited more than $59,000, a vehicle, and now faces a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. Being recognized for this operation are HSI Baltimore, CBP, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland. And accepting the award on behalf of all the recipients is Therese Randazzo, Director of the IPR Policy and Programs Division in CBP's Office of International Trade. Excellent work. Thank you so very much. And our last case is involving stolen trade secret materials. An FBI investigation revealed that a scientist stole trade secret materials from his former employer, a photovoltaic materials manufacturer. At the time of his arrest, the scientist had created a fake contract to evade non-compete clause with his employer and had planned to leave the United States in a few days with stolen research materials and proprietary formulas worth over $4.7 million in research and development costs to start working for a competitor overseas. In July, the individual pleaded guilty to 7 counts of wire fraud and was ordered to pay $500,000 to his former employer in a separate legal judgment for his theft and trade secret material. Being recognized for this operation is the FBI, and accepting the awards on behalf of all the recipients is Senior Agent Andrew Brabender of the FBI. We have Mr. Brabender? Very good. Brabender. Thank you very much. It's a special pleasure for us to recognize the agents and the individuals that are involved in all these cases, as well as the agencies themselves. So we want to thank everyone for their participation today and thank all the agents involved in these cases. With that, we thank all of you all for your participation today. Do you have any final words?
I do.
Please.
So you'll be relieved, no speeches, but I do want to take a moment to, first of all, to genuinely thank again all our partners. It's easy to lose sight that behind the statistics on enforcement and the case names and the number of websites, that there are individuals who literally have spent months and months putting together these cases, and just to get a chance to recognize some of the individual efforts to point out the difference that the agents make for consumers every day, to bring it back to my job, my health and safety, and is really what this event is all about. And that's why we're so grateful to each of you, as well as to the great team at the Global Intellectual Property Center, Brian, Lee, Kelly, the whole team that's here for putting together such an extraordinary event. Beth, thank you and congratulations on a successful day. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for making the time to join us. And we look forward to having you back, certainly before, but at the 3rd annual Intellectual Property IP Champions event next year. Anastasia has offered that as we grow, she'll talk the Redskins into lending FedEx Field. So we have a space big enough. We'll have a legit NFL wear for sale. And, but joking aside, the chance to take a moment and really connect the dots between the cold statistics and on IP and what it really means in humans' lives and what it means to make the world a place for all of us. It may be that much for us as for the IPR Center, every day is World IP Day, but on today, the actual World IP Day, we're very delighted to have you with us. Thank you. We're adjourned.